Maverick saw Edward standing beside his desk, with a few items placed on top of it. He couldn't focus on them, his mind too anxious. Edward raised an eyebrow and smirked. "What, you think I brought you here to scold you or something?" he asked, joking. Maverick sensed the light-hearted tone in his voice, and his anxiety slowly began to ease. "Relax. Honestly, little Rick, I meant every word I said." Edward spoke more openly now that they were alone. "You have no idea how many vultures are circling around my daughter, trying to win my favor. Now, I can simply brush them off since she's in a relationship with you." "Is it that bad?" Maverick asked. "Very. Not just from America but from Europe and, believe it or not, even from Russia and Asia. A bunch of leeches. The only reason I don't erase their families is because they at least know better than to act stupid. If anything bad happened to my daughter during their little tricks, I'll remind them why I'm called the Lion of America." Edward's words sent a chill down Maverick's spine. He understood his teacher was talking about the greedy families seeking to marry Isabella for favors, but somehow, part of what Edward said seemed aimed at him as well. Maverick quickly pushed the thought aside. "Teacher is definitely not giving me a warning." "Yes. Probably," he thought inwardly with a gulp. Edward gave his apprentice a momentary glare before smiling. "Now, the reason I brought you here is because of these," he said, pointing at the items on the table. Only then did Maverick take a good look at the items on the table. They were all clearly magical, with two of them familiar to him and one he wasn't quite sure about. "Give me your storage ring," Edward said, holding out his hand. Without hesitation, Maverick handed over the ring on his finger. It had come from his teacher in the first place. "These are the gifts I've prepared for you," Edward said. "Think of it as a graduation prize, since I'm pleased with your progress over the past half-year." He picked up the first item. It was a ring, looking far more impressive than the one Maverick had been wearing before. It was shaped like a crow with its wings spread, forming a full circle. A large black gem sat on top, right above the wings, almost like the crow's watchful eye. Two smaller black stones were set where its eyes would be, giving it a striking, mysterious look. Overall, it looked really cool. "All of these were made by a friend of mine, one of the best crafters and a powerful alchemist," Edward said, handing the ring to Maverick, who took it carefully. "Place a drop of blood on the gem, then wear it and send your mana into it," Edward instructed. Maverick nodded, using magic to make a small cut on his thumb. A drop of blood formed, and he let it fall onto the gem. He then slipped the ring onto his left middle finger and began channeling his magic into it. Though the ring felt loose at first, he knew it would auto-adjust since it was a magical item. 1 second. 5 seconds. "Don't stop. Keep feeding it mana," Edward advised. Maverick continued, nearly a minute passing before the ring responded. The large black gem and the two smaller ones glowed a deep crimson, and slowly, the ring resized to fit his finger perfectly. He turned his hand, rotating it both ways to get a better look, then glanced at his teacher, waiting for the explanation. He knew it had to be more than just a stylish piece. 50 cubic meters of storage, 5 times what your previous ring held, Edward began, smirking at his student. "And that's just the basic function." Maverick glanced at the ring again, waiting for Edward to elaborate. "Like the heir rings of most ancient wizarding families, this one is now bound to your blood. Aside from you, only a descendant of your choice will be able to use it, and it will respond solely to your mana. Even if someone else gets hold of it, they'll never access its contents. Not even someone at my level." Maverick's eyes lit up with excitement, but he quickly calmed down and kept listening. Inside, though, he was thrilled. If another witch or wizard tries to wear it, they'll be in for some serious pain. Even a marquis would find it unbearable. For a king, it would still hurt, but not much of a problem. Edward smirked. "Do all ancient families have this kind of ring, teacher?" Maverick asked. "Not all, but most. And in some of the most noble, oldest houses, the magic is even stronger. Wearing the heir ring of another family is considered a serious taboo in the magical world," Edward advised. "One more thing," Edward said, stretching out his hand toward Maverick. "Legilimens." Maverick's eyes widened. He never expected his teacher to cast that spell on him. But a moment later, he felt the ring respond, as though it were covering his mind. Nothing was visibly changing, yet he sensed a shield forming around his thoughts, slowly draining his stamina. He didn't even need to use his magical sense or occlumency. The ring was successfully blocking Edward's probe. Maverick understood what his teacher was doing and glanced at him, waiting for an explanation. That was a mental probe at the level of a typical Marquis with decent mana control and legilimency skills, Edward explained. Your ring will automatically guard your mind from any wizard below Marquis level. A powerful Marquis or a king could break through, but by then you'd be fully alert. And with your own mental shields, you won't need to worry. Maverick looked down at his ring, then back at Edward. Thank you, teacher, he said, gratitude showing on his face. Edward waved his hand dismissively, though he wore another smirk. There's more. Maverick was genuinely surprised now. His new ring was turning out to be quite overpowered. Edward nodded, noting his student's surprise. He continued. It's also a reverse port key, he said, catching the expected confusion on Maverick's face. Maverick knew of port keys, but this was new to him. Never heard of it, have you? Edward said, reading his face. Maverick nodded. His teacher chuckled. Of course not, but it's exactly what it sounds like, only with one condition. Only kings with control over space can use it. Maverick frowned. By space? You mean like when you tear the air? Edward nodded. Yes, technically, the power of space and spirit awakens at the Marquis rank, but you only gain real skill with it after reaching king rank. He glanced at his student, raised an eyebrow as if remembering something, then brushed it off. He was used to Maverick's genius. Marquises can barely use space manipulation or mental attacks. It's just a tickle compared to the full potential, so you won't see them bother with it. None have mastered it well enough for combat before reaching king level. Edward paused, then added, well, unless someone were to prove otherwise, like you did with mana control and perception. Maverick was beyond excited. He'd never read about any of this in his books, 2 new talents waiting when he advanced to Great Magus. He gave his teacher a sheepish smile but held back his thoughts. Anyway, Edward continued, the reverse port key is a last resort lifeline. You send your magic into the ring like this. Edward demonstrated the specific rhythm Maverick needed to follow. Once done, it'll connect to my ring, and I'll know your location immediately. Only use this when absolutely necessary. It'll drain your stamina for several days while it recharges, and you won't be at your best until it's fully recovered. Maverick nodded, understanding. I hope I never need to use it, he said. Yes, I hope so too, Edward agreed. Now, on to the next item, he said as he turned back to the table. It was a broomstick, sleek and entirely black from handle to bristles. At the top, a carved crow's head with gem-like eyes gave it a fierce, watchful look. Near the bristles, a sturdy foot grip was attached, offering a secure hold for any daring rider. Maverick observed the sleek, powerful-looking broomstick. It was unlike any Quidditch broomstick he had ever seen. Yes, as you can see, this is a flying broomstick, Edward began, picking it up and handing it to Maverick. This one is special. It accelerates from 0 to 1,300 kilometers per hour in just 10 seconds, breaking the sound barrier. It can reach top speeds of up to 2,000 kilometers per hour, with superb balance and precision, and it can hover up to 10 kilometers high. Maverick's eyes widened as he heard the specs. This was far, far beyond the capabilities of a standard Quidditch broomstick. How? He asked, puzzled, looking up at his teacher. Edward smirked. You guessed it. This would be cheating on a Quidditch pitch. He chuckled. These broomsticks aren't released to the public. Only witches or wizards with top-notch mana control and perception can handle it. Marquis-level mages, and even then only those with excellent control, are licensed to own one. Maverick gripped the handle, his hands trembling with excitement. Licensed? He asked. Yes, Edward replied. They're never for sale. First, you'd need a license, then you'd go to the craftsman to request one. But I don't have one, Maverick said hesitantly. Edward chuckled. Well, I happen to be one of the few who can grant a license. Your mana control is more than enough to handle this. I'll teach you the basics in the training room later. Maverick nodded. His teacher was a cheat himself, he thought with a smile. Store it in your ring, and let me show you the third item, Edward said, turning back to the table. A black bracelet. No, it looked more like a wand holster. Like the ring, drop a bit of blood and channel your mana into it. It has the same security functions, minus the mental shield, Edward explained, handing it to Maverick. Maverick wore it on his right arm, letting a drop of blood fall onto it before channeling his magic. The bracelet immediately adjusted to fit his arm perfectly, with no discomfort at all. This one is very special. Now, inject mana in this rhythm, Edward instructed, showing Maverick the pattern. Maverick followed along, and the bracelet began to morph, like tiny nanobots, covering his entire body. Startled, he took a step back. In seconds, he was fully clad in black, like a costume. If he had to describe it, it looked like the Black Panther suit from Marvel, but with the addition of a black cape similar to Batman's. He twisted around, inspecting his new look, then walked over to the mirror on the left wall to see himself fully. His head was completely covered, with his eyes glowing faintly crimson. Thankfully, there were no panther or bat ears, he thought with relief. His entire body was clad in matte black, with an intricate feather-like pattern woven beautifully over the surface. The cape, reaching down to his knees, added a menacing edge to his look. Like it, Maverick, lost in admiration of his new look, snapped back at Edward's question. He turned to his teacher. Incredible. I don't have the words, Maverick said. Edward smirked. Well, like the other two, it has some special functions as well, he began. First, it can make you invisible and also suppress your magic from leaking, giving you even better camouflage. It has two looks. Let me show you the patterns to inject magic to activate each form. Edward demonstrated to his student. You already know how to activate the first form, I call it stealth mode. To activate the second form, inject magic like this, Edward demonstrated. Maverick repeated the pattern, and his suit began to shift. In just 3 seconds, his look had changed. Now he wore a classic wizarding robe over a black shirt and black pants. Though traditional, the same delicate feather pattern adorned the shirt, pants, and robe, giving them a refined look. Maverick inspected his new appearance in the mirror. Teacher, I've been meaning to ask. What's with the crow theme? The ring, the broom, and even this? He said, gesturing to the suit. They all have crow-like designs. Edward scratched his head, giving a sheepish smile. Well, I thought you'd like it, so I did it to surprise you. I've been waiting for you to ask, he chuckled. You do have a thing for crows. Maverick's brow twitched as he coughed. I don't. Yes, you do. You put crows or ravens in nearly all your custom spells. Even in your illusions, you scatter those birds everywhere. Cough, cough. Never mind, teacher. I really do like all 3 items. I don't know how to express my gratitude to you. Maverick's tone grew serious as he met his teacher's gaze. If there ever comes a day you need my help, teacher, I swear by my magic, I will be there for you and your family. Edward's expression softened. He regarded Maverick seriously, not laughing it off this time. After a moment, he walked behind his desk, took a seat, and looked at his apprentice. Maverick fell silent, sensing the gravity in his teacher's gaze and feeling that something important was about to be said. Edward met his eyes, resting his chin on his hands, elbows on the table. I only ask one thing in return. Take care of my daughter, to the best of your ability. Maverick's eyes widened slightly in surprise. I don't care if, in the future, you find more wives, Edward continued. But she comes first. She's your priority, and you'll need her consent before marrying anyone else. Don't make her sad. That's all I ask of you. Maverick's face turned solemn. I promise. I, Maverick Caesar, hereby swear by my magic to take care of Isabella Garling, to love her, to keep her happy to the best of my ability. He raised his wand, sealing the oath with magic, even surprising Edward. You didn't need to make it a magical oath. You're my apprentice, and you know I trust you, little Rick, Edward said with a faint, helpless smile. I know, teacher, and I don't have any plans for polygamy. Not now, at least, Maverick explained. Edward waved his hand. I don't mind. It's common among powerful wizards, with very few exceptions. But just make sure Isabella is your priority, and that you have her consent. Maverick didn't know what to say. He truly hadn't considered marrying multiple women. He hadn't even thought about marriage at all until recently. He pushed the thoughts aside, figuring that only time would tell. I swear, teacher. Good, Edward said, standing up. Let's head to the training room. No, outside. I'll give you some basics on riding your broom, he added, walking to the door. Maverick quickly followed. They spent nearly an hour training, and Maverick quickly got the hang of controlling the broom. It heavily involved the 2 key talents: magical energy manipulation, which shielded his eyes and body against air resistance, and magical sense, for maneuvering. Thanks to his strong mastery in both, he learned flying with surprising speed. After the lesson, Edward told Maverick to head back and get some sleep. Tomorrow, he and the Garling family would be traveling to the UK, to his home. London, United Kingdom. Han. What time did you say they were arriving? Around noon, Michael. It should be morning over there now. They'll be here any time. Inside the Caesar family house in London, Maverick's parents were making final preparations, ready to welcome guests into their home. So, he's finished with his studies there? Ariel asked, carefully adjusting a vase on the table. That's what Ed told me, Michael replied, casting a quick glance at the clock. But he won't stay long. I don't think. Something about visiting other magical countries. Just then, their fireplace flared to life with green flames, causing Michael and Ariel to turn their heads quickly. A moment later, Edward stepped out first, wearing his usual bright expression. Mike, Ari, he greeted. Following him, 3 more figures emerged. First Maverick, then Isabella and her mother. They were all dressed casually, but appropriately for London's weather. Maverick wore a classic black woolen long coat over a sleek black shirt and pants, a sharp yet casual look that suited him perfectly. Michael and Ariel greeted Edward first, then turned to the 3 behind him. Son, welcome home, Ariel said, stepping forward to hug Maverick, while Michael gave him a nod. Welcome back, son. Ariel then turned to Sylvia, her arms outstretched. Sylvie, she called, and the 2 women embraced. It's been a while. Yeah, Sylvia replied, smiling warmly. They then looked at the last person. Isabella stood a little apart, looking nervous with her head down. Honey, are you okay? Ariel asked, walking over and gently placing a hand on Isabella's shoulder. Isabella quickly tried to shake off her awkwardness. I'm fine. Good. Aunt. Thank you. She stuttered, her words coming out anxiously. Ariel gave Isabella a concerned look, then turned to Sylvia, silently asking if everything was okay. Sylvia smiled reassuringly. She's fine. Probably just a little shy after so long, she said with a playful wink at her daughter. Isabella flushed slightly but quickly gathered herself. I'm okay, Auntie. Just excited to be back in the UK after such a long time. Ariel raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. She shot Isabella a skeptical glance but chose not to press the issue, since Sylvia didn't seem worried. Let's go, Ariel said, addressing the room. I know it's early in New York, so I've combined breakfast and lunch together. She gestured for everyone to follow her toward the dining room. It was just past noon, and both families sat around the dining table, enjoying Ariel's delicious spread. At first, the conversation was light, filled with small talk. But soon, it shifted to Maverick and his studies. Maverick shared stories about his time in America, his teachers, and his exam results, which brought pleased smiles to his parents' faces. The conversation then turned to Maverick's plans for the next 2 years. This was the first time he was sharing them directly with his parents. At first, they hesitated and advised against it, expressing concerns that he was still too young and that the journey might be dangerous. But when Edward spoke up, vouching for Maverick and assuring them he was more than ready, his mother and father eventually agreed, though reluctantly. Finally, the conversation shifted to meeting the Queen. Edward mentioned to Michael that he'd like to join, offering to help cover any gaps in the conversation that might arise. Michael agreed and arranged the meeting. To their surprise, the Queen requested to meet them immediately if it was convenient. Michael shared this with Edward and Maverick, and they both agreed. So, after lunch, the 3 of them discreetly left for Buckingham Palace. They hadn't come by motorcade but in Michael's private car, and with a subtle muggle-repelling charm, they reached their destination without any interruptions in just under an hour. This was meant to be a very private meeting, so the Queen hadn't arranged any elaborate reception. To greet Maverick's party, there was only one person waiting, and to Maverick's surprise, he was a wizard. Not just any wizard, but a great magus. Michael quietly explained to his son that the Queen had 2 great magus under her direct command, aside from the witches and wizards working in their government's special department for magicals. The car came to a stop, and with the repellent spell still active, only the wizard waiting for them took notice of their arrival. Maverick studied the man with interest. He looked very old, gray hair, deeply lined face, and an aura of experience that suggested he might be centuries old. As a great magus, he could easily have lived for over 300 years. Maverick, however, kept his questions to himself. Greetings, Speaker Garling. The wizard addressed Edward first, showing the respect due to someone of Edward's rank in the magical world. Edward nodded, extending his hand. Jacob Rivers. I've heard of you, a Nomage-born hero from World War II. You disappeared after the duel with the Rosier Witch. Edward's brow lifted, intrigued. Jacob offered a small, modest smile. You flatter me, Mr. Speaker. I didn't fight her alone. And now, I'm proud to serve Her Majesty. Protecting her has become my mission. Edward nodded, recognizing that Jacob preferred not to discuss it further. Jacob then turned to Michael. Prime Minister, he greeted with a respectful bow. Jacob, good to see you, Michael replied, his tone friendly and familiar. And you must be Maverick. Jacob finally turned to him, extending his hand. Maverick returned the greeting with a respectful smile and a nod. Jacob led Maverick, Michael, and Edward through several doors until they finally arrived in a room with a square table, a chair at each side, and a fruit basket resting in the center. At one chair sat a woman, facing the door through which they entered. Maverick recognized her immediately as the Queen, and Michael greeted her as soon as he laid eyes on her. Your Majesty, he said, presenting the proper etiquette. Come, gentlemen, please sit, she responded with a nod to Michael. Edward walked over first and sat down at the table, directly across from her, while Maverick and Michael took the remaining sides. The Queen gave the Archmagus a nod. Speaker Garling, she addressed him. Your Majesty, he replied, returning the gesture. I've heard you're interested in my pupil. Yes, she replied in her refined, royal accent, glancing from Michael to Maverick. You've grown up, young man. Maverick nodded politely. Your Majesty, it's good to see you again. This wasn't the first time he had been to Buckingham Palace. When he was younger, he had visited with his father and even met the Queen herself. The Queen turned her gaze back to Edward. Tell me, Speaker Garling, you took one of my subjects as your disciple when he was only 6, yet you never thought to inform me. Edward didn't flinch. In fact, Maverick was even more impressed by the Queen. She spoke so calmly, as if she were equals with a man who could level London without much effort. Maverick's respect for her grew as he saw her in a new light. Respectfully, Your Majesty, I'm not required to inform you, Edward replied calmly. He is a wizard. I used my authority as speaker to take him in as my apprentice and to conceal his identity while I trained him. It was the first time Maverick had seen his teacher speak like this. Yes, those blasted laws made by fools after the war, Queen Elizabeth retorted. Edward raised an eyebrow. They were necessary. Many good people died for them, yours and mine alike. Oh, don't misunderstand, the Queen replied, with a hint of condescension. I respect the agreements. I just find some points unfair, like how you or some ancient house can simply snatch away any magical child born to us ordinary humans, especially those from foreign lands. Ahem. Michael cleared his throat, feeling the tension building in the room. The monarch and the Archmagus gave him a brief sideways glance before continuing. Tell me, Mr. Speaker, the Queen said, do you plan for him to join Makusa? If so, I must protest. His father is the head of my government, and I can't have him working for a foreign country. Edward met her gaze and finally understood why she had insisted on meeting Maverick. No, I never had such intentions, and I never will. He cast a quick glance at Maverick before turning back to her. He is my student, and that is all. You should know he completed his nomage schooling here in the UK. I took him as my apprentice only because of his talent and because his father was one of my closest friends. He paused before continuing. In fact, one reason for my visit this time is to register him under the British Ministry of Magic as a British wizard. The Queen looked at Maverick for a few quiet moments before speaking. You're an unusual one, aren't you, young man? Finished school, then university, all while learning magic. I hear you did quite well on your magical exams, too, she said, as if inviting Maverick to explain. Maverick gave a sheepish smile, scratching his head. Thank you for the praise, Your Majesty. It's all thanks to my teacher, he said, nodding to Edward before continuing. He'd visit home regularly to mentor me in magic, even with his own responsibilities. And, well, normal school wasn't too challenging for me. I don't mean to brag, but I'd say I'm pretty smart, he added with a grin. The Queen gave him a look, then chuckled. Yes, I saw your university grades. Impressive. Learning from both worlds. She turned to Michael with a smirk. How on earth did that girl Ariel produce such a prodigy? Michael coughed. Your Majesty, he's my son too. The Queen chuckled, then turned back to Edward. Well, I must thank you. Maverick may be a magical, but he's of the land I rule. You've taken wonderful care of him. Edward nodded, playing along. May I ask what you intend to request of my pupil? Surely you didn't summon him just to congratulate him. At last, the conversation turned to the real reason for the meeting. The Queen gave Edward a long, steady look, which he returned. I'd normally say it's none of your business, but since it's you, I don't mind sharing my proposal with young Maverick while you're here, she said, before looking directly at Maverick. I'd like you to work for me, for my government, she stated bluntly. Maverick was speechless. He'd expected something like this but hadn't imagined it would be so direct. Edward remained silent, clearly leaving the decision to his student. Maverick glanced at his teacher, and seeing he wasn't going to intervene, took a deep breath. Ahem. Your Majesty, he began, stumbling slightly. I'm still young, and I just finished school. I was hoping to travel for a couple of years first. After that, I'd like to work as a teacher at Hogwarts, so he trailed off, struggling to find a polite way to say no. The Queen kept her gaze fixed on Maverick. A bit of a power move, perhaps. Though he fidgeted slightly under her stare, he stood by his decision. His future wouldn't be as someone who just followed orders. No, he intended to be the one giving them. Maverick hesitated at first, but in the end, his expression was firm. The Queen saw that her plan hadn't worked inside. Across from them, Edward held back a smirk, giving his student a silent thumbs up. On the outside, though, he kept his face blank. The Queen decided to go with her backup plan. With Edward here, she couldn't simply make demands. Besides, by law, the witch or wizard had the final say on joining non-magical government. The Queen was determined to get Maverick on her side. Ever since learning that the head of her government had a magical son who was an apprentice to a speaker, she had made up her mind to recruit him, no matter what. First, speakers didn't usually take on students. They had far more important duties. Second, if they did take one, it had to be someone truly exceptional. And finally, having an apprentice of an archmagus meant an indirect link to the archmagus himself. She flexed the conditions and laid the details out for Maverick again. Whether you travel to the moon or teach at some school, that doesn't matter to me. I only need you to represent me, she explained. I don't need you guarding me or going on missions every day. I'd only call on you as a last resort, she added. If my family faced an extraordinary danger, or if the country were to go to war. Maverick listened carefully, as did his father and teacher. The two adults, however, stayed silent and allowed him to make the decision on his own. To be honest, he was tempted. He'd have the chance to work alongside his father, and she had promised him a lot of freedom. But in the end, he chose to decline. The idea of going to war for the country wasn't appealing to him. It wasn't that he didn't love his country. He did. But he was a wizard and, in time, would become a powerhouse. His system alone gave him confidence. He simply didn't want to be forced to kill for political disputes led by people behind desks. After all, he was from 2024, and he knew that most future wars were little more than politically driven conflicts. I apologize, Your Majesty. I'll have to decline your offer. I don't want to fight other countries over politics, Maverick said, making his decision clear. Rather than looking disappointed, the Queen seemed puzzled. She stared at Maverick for a moment, then turned her gaze to Edward. Edward looked at his apprentice as if he were a fool, and Michael, wearing a similar expression, did the same. Maverick quickly sensed that something was off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it, and didn't realize it was because of what he just said. Mr. Speaker, the Queen called, her voice a bit heavier. I must question the education you've provided to young Maverick here. Don't look at me. That's all him, Edward replied quickly, hands raised in defense. Maverick looked from the Queen to his teacher, then to his father and back to the Queen. After giving Edward a hard look, the Queen turned back to Maverick. What makes you think I'd ask you to fight other countries, young man? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Maverick's face grew puzzled. But you said I'd have to fight wars. Yes, but not with other countries, you donut. Do you think wars only happen between nations? The Queen shot back. Maverick's mouth opened, but he couldn't find the words. He now realized how foolish his response had sounded. His face flushed with embarrassment. Not for himself, but for his teacher, whom he had unintentionally made look bad in front of the Queen. Politics and knowledge of global organizations were all part of what Edward had taught him, and he'd momentarily forgotten, completely misunderstanding the Queen's words. He first shot an apologetic look at his teacher, then turned to the Queen. Apologies, my Queen. I misunderstood. The Queen lifted the corner of her lips in a small, knowing smile. Let me explain further. You'd only be asked to fight for Great Britain against terrorist organizations, wars against them, if any arise. More importantly, only if those organizations involve supernatural elements like witches or wizards, she clarified. Before Maverick could respond, she continued, allow me to sweeten the deal. You'd become part of my 00 squad. We have 9 spots, and fortunately, there are 3 vacant at the moment. She paused, watching Maverick. You'll find the benefits quite convenient, especially since you have this grand plan to travel the world. As soon as she mentioned the 0 squad, Maverick's father straightened up. He couldn't help but blurt out as soon as she finished, Your Majesty, isn't that a little nonsense, Prime Minister? The Queen interrupted sternly. This is my decision, and as the supreme authority of this country, I can add or remove my subjects from government posts as I deem fit. Maverick's mouth hung open, not because of what the others might think, but because he had a vague idea of what this 00 squad entailed. When the Queen mentioned it, his mind immediately flashed to memories from his previous life. A certain action movie franchise incredibly popular worldwide. The infamous introduction echoed in his thoughts. Bond. James Bond. Caesar. Maverick Kaz. Cough, cough, cough. The attention in the room shifted to Maverick as he suddenly started coughing, his face flushed with embarrassment. Maverick quickly swore that his thoughts were completely unintentional. He tried to shake off the awkwardness, meeting the Queen's gaze. Your Majesty, may I ask what the benefits are that you just mentioned? Your Majesty, may I ask what the benefits are that you just mentioned? Maverick asked. The Queen sensed that her persuasion was finally working. She straightened up, her gaze steady as she continued. The 00 squad is an elite and covert group under my direct command. There can only ever be 9 agents, from 001 to 009. They handle missions of the highest stakes, missions directly tied to national security. In this squad, there are 3 non-magical and 3 magical agents. The non-magical agents handle all matters concerning the nation's safety, while the magical agents focus solely on national security when facing supernatural threats. For you, Maverick, I'm prepared to make an exception. You would only be called upon in the most extraordinary circumstances, if the nation faced a threat beyond what MI5, MI6, or even Defense Intelligence could manage. Only then would I summon you to defend this land. Maverick couldn't help but interrupt, saying, But I'm only a magus. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but it's hard to believe you'd put such trust in me. I mean, this is the first real conversation we've had. Your expectations of me seem unusually high. His doubts were understandable. After all, only his teacher, Edward, truly knew his potential. The Queen didn't mind his interruption. In fact, she would have found it strange if Maverick hadn't raised the issue. For now, no, you're no different from the other wizards working for my government, she began, pausing briefly. But I know this man, she continued, pointing to Edward. There is an unspoken understanding we leaders share, and really everyone does. A speaker of any nation is seen as equal to the nation itself. You can interpret that however you like, young man. She looked from Maverick to Edward and back again. Not only are you his direct apprentice, but he even took the time to attend this meeting for you. That shows me just how high his expectations are of you. She paused, allowing Maverick a moment to think. Think of it as a bet, she said. I'm betting on you, for the future of my nation. Her voice was steady, letting her words sink in. Edward didn't refute or add anything to what she said. He knows exactly what his status meant. He was here only to make sure his apprentice wasn't taken advantage of. Beyond that, he would let Maverick make his own decisions and never interfere. It was the same with Michael. He agreed with everything the Queen had said and left the matter to be settled by his son. Maverick took a moment to think and had to agree with the Queen. Everything she said made sense. Honestly, given the situation, he would bet on himself too. He met her gaze and nodded, signaling that he understood. The Queen nodded in return before continuing her explanation. Where were we? Yes. So basically, the conditions are meant to ensure you that your movements won't be restricted in any way. She paused for a moment. And as for the benefits, well, within Britain you'll have a very high authority across government facilities. If there's something you need done, doors will open, sparing you from unnecessary bureaucracy. She held his gaze with a pointed look. This isn't an invitation for corruption. But for the most part, my government would turn a blind eye and grant you authority, as long as it doesn't bring harm to the people in any way. She paused again, relaxing slightly before she continued. Internationally, you'd gain substantial travel privileges. A free visa to 127 countries, including all of North and South America, all of Europe, parts of Asia, and the Middle East. Even China. She gave a small smirk. Not Russia, though. But you're a wizard. I'm sure you have ways of getting in which I don't need to know. Let's see. Yes, you'd be licensed to carry firearms, though I doubt you'd find it necessary. And finally, she narrowed her eyes. You'd have the license to kill any target deemed a threat to my nation. The Queen watched Maverick's expression as he took this all in. And again, she added firmly, this doesn't mean you'll have free rein to kill anyone whenever you want, and I trust you wouldn't. It just means there will be fewer questions about your decisions, if and when you ever decide to take a life. She paused, giving a brief glance to Michael. I have complete trust in the Prime Minister I've appointed to lead my government. And you are his son. She paused, then continued. Finally, I'm certain the man sitting here, she gestured to Edward, wouldn't choose an apprentice without carefully considering their character. So, you're free to travel as much as you like, to teach, to learn, hell, even play football, or become a movie star if you want. You'd have complete freedom. All I ask is that you represent me if extraordinary circumstances demand it. And one last thing. Aside from national security, if there were ever a threat to myself or my direct line, natural or supernatural, I would call on you then as well. But, as I said, these scenarios are as unlikely as the nation going to war. Taking a breath, she delivered her final words. So, young man, will you take on the responsibility to represent Great Britain? To represent me? Maverick gulped, feeling the weight of the offer. The benefits far outweighed the inconveniences. He glanced over at his father, who looked back at him, a trace of concern in his eyes, though he held his words. It was probably a worry for his safety. Then he looked to his teacher, and Edward met his gaze at the same time, his eyes expressing nothing but trust. Maverick knew his teacher would support whatever choice he made. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath, letting the silence in the room settle around him. After nearly half a minute, he opened his eyes and met the Queen's steady gaze. Your Majesty, he said firmly, it would be my honor to serve you and this nation. The Queen's expression softened slightly, but she maintained her composed demeanor, simply giving a nod. Then she turned to the room and called out, her voice steady. 008, 002. Two figures stepped forward, canceling their disillusionment spells. One was a middle-aged woman standing to the Queen's left, and the other was Jacob, whom Maverick and Edward had met earlier. Maverick had sensed their presence through his magical sense, as had Edward, but neither had mentioned it. They both knew these were the Queen's people, likely stationed here for more than just observation. Maverick felt a flicker of surprise, but he kept his composure, understanding now that these two weren't simply guards. They were his soon-to-be colleagues in the Zero Squad. Both figures gave a respectful gesture, a slight bow, almost like a salute, as they said, "Ma'am." The Queen nodded in acknowledgement before shifting her gaze to Edward. You mentioned wanting to register him with the British Ministry of Magic? Edward nodded. His wizarding identity is currently just his name in Ilvermorny's records. It worked while he was studying, but now, for his future, he needs proper identification. We planned to go to the ministry after this meeting. Unnecessary? The Queen replied with a hint of a smile. She raised an eyebrow. Unless you'd like to see your face on tomorrow's front page, she added, implying she had another solution. Edward's face remained neutral, though his tone carried a trace of interest. I'd like to avoid that if possible, but I doubt we could completely escape notice. Unless you have a way to get him registered without us needing to step foot there. The Queen's lips curved slightly. I do, she said, and leaned back slightly in her chair. It's not every day that you get to do a favor for a speaker. And she knew what it weighed. No fuss, no crowds. Consider it a favor from the crown. She explained, the turn to her right. 008. Please ask Minister Fudge to come to the palace. Tell him it's urgent. The Queen instructed. The woman didn't hesitate. She simply nodded and walked out. The Queen then turned her attention back to her guests. Her name is Joanna, she said, glancing at Edward to see if he recognized her. Another Nomage-born name from World War II, Edward replied thoughtfully. They saved many lives during the battle against Grindelwald and Schmidt's forces. I remember the heroes from the war, Your Majesty. Even though the Ministry of Magic at the time didn't highlight them much because of their blood status. Edward paused, then added with a touch of curiosity. I hear their decadent behavior hasn't changed much since then. The Queen sighed, her frustration clear. Idiots, she spat. They're simply ignorant. Sometimes I wonder if Dumbledore had a hand in this. She raised an eyebrow at Edward. After all, his lover started the war against science. Maybe he thinks he's making up for it by manipulating things, keeping British wizards ignorant of the world's advancements. Edward rubbed his chin, thinking, if anything, he'd try to advise your country's nobles to let go of their blood supremacy ideas and see the world for what it really is. Dumbledore, though annoying at times, wouldn't harm our kind on purpose. Edward wasn't embarrassed to speak his mind, even if it meant praising Dumbledore or criticizing the Queen's people right in front of her. Honestly, your so-called pure-blood families are just ignorant. That's all there is to it. Maverick watched in silence, his eyes wide. He silently gave his teacher an imaginary thumbs up for being so bold. The Queen gave Edward a long, scrutinizing look. I never thought you, of all people, would vouch for him. Edward raised a hand in defense. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a pleasant impression of the bastard, ever since… well, you know. He paused, glanced at the Queen, but didn't elaborate. But that doesn't mean I'm petty enough to speak falsely about him when I know better. The Queen sighed, then brightened her eyes and looked at Maverick. Young man, if you do end up teaching at Hogwarts, try to put a little sense into those brainwashed noble children there. Maverick scratched his head. Well, that's a long way off, he said. If anyone can do it, I'm sure it's my son who'll bring some sense to this country's magical community. Michael added, speaking up for the first time in a while. The noble wizarding families of Britain would never have imagined that the country's Muggle leaders cared more about their situation than they did about themselves. Maverick glanced at his father, giving him a look of appreciation. Right then, the Queen said, catching their attention. Let's eat. I've had my best chefs prepare a sumptuous lunch. She gave a nod to her left, and Jacob nodded back before leaving to make arrangements. Though Maverick, Michael, and Edward had already had lunch back at home, they knew it would be rude to decline the Queen's invitation, so they simply thanked her politely and joined in some small talk. Soon, a few butlers and maids entered, dressed in formal uniforms. They carried an array of dishes and drinks, arranging them neatly on the table. About 10 minutes into their meal, a knock came from the door. At the Queen's nod, Jacob cancelled his disillusionment spell, walked over, and opened the door. Joanna entered alone, approached the Queen, and spoke quietly. Minister Fudge is outside, ma'am. Let him in, the Queen instructed. Joanna stepped out again, returning moments later, followed by a chubby, middle-aged man dressed in finely tailored, expensive-looking robes, fitting attire for a wizard of his stature. Minister Fudge approached the Queen directly, his focus entirely on her, not sparing a glance for anyone else in the room. He stopped a respectful distance from the Queen and gave a polite nod. Your Majesty, may I ask the reason for your urgent summons? His tone was calm, as if speaking to an equal. The Queen didn't seem bothered by his tone. She paused her meal, wiped her mouth delicately, and then responded, Thank you for coming on such short notice, Minister. As the Queen spoke, Fudge's gaze slowly shifted to the people sitting at the table. His eyes first landed on Michael, and he gave a polite nod. However, when he saw Edward, his calm expression instantly changed. A cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and his confident demeanor turned nervous. Gold, Speaker Garling, he stuttered. Unlike the Queen, Edward didn't stop eating. With a piece of meat on his fork, he met Fudge's gaze and raised an eyebrow before taking a bite. The action seemed to make Fudge even more nervous, as beads of sweat quickly formed on his forehead. That's strange. I've never seen him react this way to Dumbledore, the Queen remarked casually. When Fudge heard this, he seemed to regain some of his confidence. He straightened his posture, puffed out his chest, trying to appear more composed. Despite his efforts, the slight shaking in his hands remained, but no one commented on it. Before Fudge's arrival, the seating arrangement had been adjusted. The Queen sat at one end, with Edward opposite her. Michael and Maverick sat together on the other side, leaving one side and a chair empty. Take a seat, Minister. Join us for lunch, the Queen said, gesturing to the empty chair. Fudge nodded hurriedly and sat down. Taking a seat, Fudge quickly turned to the Queen. Your Majesty, could you explain why you called me here and what the urgency is? He asked, deliberately avoiding Edward's direction. Yes, the Queen began, taking another bite of her meal. You've met Michael before, I'm sure, she asked, glancing at Fudge. Fudge nodded, glancing at Michael and Maverick. We've met a few times, during formal meetings between our sides. The Queen nodded, taking another delicate bite. She wiped her mouth and continued. And I'm sure you're familiar with Speaker Garling here. Fudge's gulped. He turned his head, giving Edward a polite nod before turning back to the Queen. Yes, I've seen him once at the ICW conference and once during the World Security Council meeting. The Queen noticed Fudge's nervousness around Edward, but she decided not to ask. This wasn't the right time or place. Good, she said, pausing before continuing. The reason I summoned you actually has something to do with him. She gestured toward Maverick. Fudge turned and finally looked at Maverick, who was quietly observing him. He gave a small nod before looking back at the Queen, awaiting an explanation. This is Maverick, the Queen continued. Maverick Caesar. Caesar, Fudge murmured, then glanced at Michael. Yes, he's my son, Michael confirmed. Fudge's expression remained puzzled as he turned to the Queen. She didn't waste time and got straight to the point. Maverick here is a wizard. Fudge finally turned to Maverick, his curiosity piqued. He paused for a moment before asking, I think the Prime Minister should have mentioned if his son was from our side. He glanced at Michael. I took him in as my apprentice, concealed his identity, and asked Mike here not to tell anyone, Edward replied, answering Fudge's unspoken question and catching him off guard. It took a few seconds for Fudge to process what Edward had just said. I took him on as my apprentice, Edward said, kept who he was a secret and asked Mike not to tell anyone. Fudge blinked, a bit taken aback. You took him as an apprentice? The son of Britain's Prime Minister. Edward nodded. Yes, he's talented and I saw potential in him. Where he's from or what family he belongs to doesn't matter to me. Fudge could only gulp at Edward's straightforward confidence. He had no argument, after all, no rules were broken. Edward then shared the usual background story they had now told many times to many people. Just as Edward finished telling Fudge about Maverick, the Queen made it clear why he was here. Help get the boy registered and set up his identity, Queen Elizabeth asked Fudge. Finally understanding why he had been called, Fudge's face quickly changed to one of flattery. He cleared his throat and offered a smooth smile. Of course, for Speaker Garling's apprentice, it would be my pleasure. Being the politician, he quickly thought about how he could benefit from the situation. And what could be better than earning a favor from an archmagus? Edward didn't mind. If it kept things quiet, all the better. Taking Maverick to the ministry would only attract too much attention. I'll have things ready by tomorrow, Fudge said. He paused, then asked, Should I bring it here, Your Majesty? The Queen looked to Michael. Please send it to the Prime Minister's house. Fudge glanced at Michael. Very well. I'll make sure they are sent to your house, Mr. Prime Minister. Michael nodded. Thank you, Minister. Once the important discussions wrapped up, Fudge asked Maverick a few more questions about his future plans and his views on the country's magical community. Maverick answered, choosing his words carefully to avoid further questions. Then they shifted to small talk, with Fudge sharing the latest news from the British magical community. The Queen, Michael, and Edward joined in, adding both official and unofficial stories, while Maverick mostly listened quietly. The Queen's small banquet ended soon after, and Fudge made his exit first, throwing in more flattery toward Edward and once again promising to handle the favor. Maverick saw the minister's political side firsthand. The man didn't even try to hide his shamelessness, making it clear that he was doing a favor. Fortunately, Edward wasn't petty. He simply nodded, showing his experience in handling people like Fudge without reacting. After the minister left, the Queen invited Maverick to return for a brief orientation with the Zero Squad before he began his travels. Maverick promised to return soon, after Edward and his family left for America at the end of the weekend. Then Edward, Michael, and Maverick said their farewells and left the palace. Just like when they arrived, they left quietly, without any sign they had even been there. By the time they got back home, it was nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as the three of them entered, they saw Sylvia and Ariel sitting on the living room sofa with Isabella between them, engaged in a deep conversation. Ah, you're back, Ariel called out, standing up. Maverick glanced at Isabella and noticed her looking down, her cheeks slightly flushed. It was clear that Sylvia had filled in the blanks for his mother, and the two women had likely gossiped about him to Isabella during his visit with the Queen. How did it go? Meeting the English Queen? Sylvia asked as she too stood up and walked over to them. Good. Better than expected, Edward replied. She was pretty badass, Maverick said as he walked over to the sofa and sat down beside Isabella. Edward and Michael followed and took seats, while their wives moved next to them. Really? What happened? Ariel asked, looking at her son. Well, Maverick glanced at his teacher. She spoke to him without even flinching. You know, the teacher is. He paused, searching for the right word. Famous for being. He cleared his throat, already regretting bringing it up. Edward raised an eyebrow, curious to hear his students' take on his reputation. Well, very powerful. Frightening to a lot of people, Maverick managed to say. Is that how you think people see me as? Edward asked with amusement. Everyone gave him a knowing smile, sensing his slight embarrassment. Cough. That's not the point, teacher, Maverick said quickly, trying to hide his shyness. She was just a regular human, but the way she talked even made me feel intimidated. He paused, remembering something. Unlike her magical counterpart, who was sweating buckets as soon as he laid eyes on you, Edward chuckled. Yes, Fudge is quite the character. Actually, I've never even spoken to him before this. No idea why he reacted that way. Because you're the Golden Lion of America. The guy who took on Grindelwald even when you were a rank lower back then, Maverick thought but held his tongue. So, what did she want? Ariel asked, glancing at her husband. Michael scratched his head. He certainly wasn't about to spill everything. It was tough enough for him to accept the Queen's arrangements for Maverick. Though the benefits were impressive, especially since he would be doing very little most of the time, the risks were enormous when the time came. But he had accepted because by now, he had some idea of how powerful his son might become. His wife, however, he was sure had no clue. She just wanted him to work closely with me. You know, when it comes to things related to magic, Michael explained, downplaying things as much as he could without outright lying. Really? Ariel raised an eyebrow, skeptical. It's true, Edward chimed in, coming to Michael's rescue. She just wanted him to work for the government. But my student here did some impressive talking and pretty much made himself a freeloader. Sylvia cocked her head, looking confused. Well, he'll get paid, he just doesn't have to work much, Edward clarified. And he won't be working for anyone until he finishes his journey traveling the world. Ariel nodded, getting some idea of what had happened. Meanwhile, Maverick glanced at Isabella, leaned in, and whispered, What's up? You look tense. I'm fine, she whispered back quickly, glancing at him briefly. Sylvia noticed the brief exchange between her daughter and Maverick. She turned to Ariel and winked before calling out, All right, since Maverick's business is done, why don't we all head out for a little fun? She glanced at her husband afterward. Ariel also looked at Michael. Edward and Michael exchanged a quick glance before making up their minds. Nah, they both replied in unison. Michael then asked, Let's go watch tonight's game. United's playing. Edward thought for a moment. No much sports. Sure, but there better be some betting involved. Michael chuckled. Of course. He then glanced at his wife. Sorry, honey, but take Maverick and Isabella with you. Sylvia's brow twitched, but Maverick cut in before she could respond. I'll take Bella around Diagon Alley. He glanced at Edward. Teacher. Edward raised his hand. Just be careful. Sylvia and Ariel exchanged looks, sighed, then advised the same. Be careful. They had initially planned to go together, do a little shopping and then head to a restaurant, two families enjoying the day. Sylvia had, in fact, told Maverick's mother about her daughter and Maverick's relationship, so Ariel suggested a nice outing, a little celebration, some fun around London. With the two families now becoming more closely connected, it seemed like a great idea. Unfortunately, their husbands had other plans. But this worked out just as well. Though they wouldn't all be together, everyone would still have some fun. Just not in the same way. They quickly changed into casual clothes, except for Maverick and Isabella, who wore their wizarding robes since their destination was the heart of Wizarding Britain. Michael's house had 3 cars, one for him, one for his wife, and one for Maverick. The women left first, while Edward and Michael weren't in a hurry since the football game they planned to watch was later that day. Not long after the women, Maverick and Isabella also took a car and drove off, heading toward Charing Cross Road. Once they were alone in the car on the way to the Leaky Cauldron, Maverick finally asked Isabella what their mothers had been talking about. Everything. Isabella's mother had spilled all the beans, with Isabella stuck sitting awkwardly between them. Maverick thought that if it were him, he would have no problem faking a faint to get out of it. He was glad to hear that his mom was okay with their relationship. Her only worry had been that Isabella was still in school. But after Sylvia patiently explained how things worked in the wizarding world, she had come around. What? Isabella asked, glancing sideways at Maverick, who was at the wheel with a silly grin on his face. Maverick scratched his nose. Nothing. Bet you were really embarrassed, he said with a chuckle. Isabella rolled her eyes and gave him a light punch on the shoulder. Of course I was. If I'd known, I would have gone with you to meet your Nomage queen, she said, looking at him with an expression, clearly plotting some payback for leaving her alone. Right? Maverick nodded, still laughing. Next time, I'll make sure to take you. They talked more, and before it was 4 o'clock, they reached Charing Cross Road and parked the car near the leaky cauldron. Maverick noticed Isabella was slowly returning to her usual relaxed tone with him, which he was glad for. He really didn't want her being awkward around him all the time. It was her straightforwardness that had attracted him in the first place. Well, that and the fact that she looked gorgeous. What a weird way to enter the center of magical Britain. Isabella couldn't help but comment, standing next to Maverick in front of the worn-out-looking pub. Maverick chuckled softly. For centuries, Muggleborns have used this place as a gateway, their first glimpse into the magical world. He glanced at Isabella with a small smile. It may look old, but it holds countless stories. Isabella shot him a sideways glance, raising an eyebrow. You sound like an old man. He laughed, raising his hands. Hey, I read it in a book. With that, he pushed the creaky door open and gestured for her to follow. Come on, let's go. Chime, chime. With the soft sound of bells, Maverick and Isabella stepped inside. It looked the same, felt the same. Even the customers seemed the same, sitting at their usual spots, murmuring over drinks or flipping through copies of the Daily Prophet. Maverick let out a nostalgic sigh. Just then, a familiar voice called out from near the bar. Well, if it isn't a familiar face. Back from your trip abroad. Looking ahead, Maverick spotted Tom behind the bar. His usual friendly tone matched with his ever-odd appearance. Next to him was a little blonde girl, reading a book that rested on the counter. She was probably sitting on a tall stool, her head barely reaching above the surface as she focused on the pages. Maverick walked up to the counter with Isabella close behind. As they passed the long tables, a few customers glanced their way. Maverick barely noticed. He was used to the curious stares by now. Isabella, however, didn't spare them a second glance and completely ignored the attention. Mr. Tom, it's been a while. Good to see you, Maverick greeted. Tom returned the greeting with his usual wide grin. To anyone else, it might seem a little creepy, but Maverick knew it was sincere. Maverick glanced at Isabella, a small smile on his face. Bella, this is Mr. Tom, the landlord of this place, he said, then turned to Tom. Mr. Tom, this is Isabella, my girlfriend. Isabella blushed slightly, but only for a moment. She gave a polite little bow. Pleasure to meet you, sir. Girlfriend, you say? Tom said, grinning even wider, making Maverick sigh. Just then, wow. Your hair is so beautiful. A new voice suddenly interrupted, making all three of them glance toward it. The little blonde girl, who had been completely lost in her book, was now staring at Isabella with wide, admiring eyes. Ah! Tom made a small sound and gestured to the girl. This is my granddaughter, Hannah, he said with a wide smile. She likes to visit during her Muggle school holidays. Hannah, still staring at Isabella, blinked and quickly looked down at her book, her cheeks turning a shade of pink. Why, thank you, Hannah. Isabella smiled warmly. Yours is beautiful, too. Hannah gave a shy smile, her eyes flicking back to her book, though she clearly looked happy. Maverick watched the girl, and his memories stirred. Future wife of Neville. He thought inwardly, but kept it to himself. He didn't want to say or do anything that might change the plot. Not until he was absolutely confident in his own strength. Hello! Maverick spoke up, drawing the girl's attention. Hannah slowly raised her head, shyly thanked Isabella, and then glanced at Maverick. Your grandfather is one of the kindest people I know. You're very lucky. Maverick's words made Hannah smile widely, and her awkwardness disappeared instantly. Tom chuckled, his grin widening. That's very kind of you to say, young Maverick. Maverick returned the smile, though his brow twitched slightly at the next question. Here to book a room? Tom winked, his wide grin in place. No matter how playful the gesture was meant to be, it always came off as a bit creepy when it came from Tom. Diagon Alley. Maverick replied quickly. Isabella's an American, which, I'm giving her a tour. Right. Well, you go ahead. Have a good time, Tom said, gesturing with his hand, his grin never fading. Maverick nodded and glanced at Isabella. Come on, let's go. They both gave Hannah a friendly smile once more before walking away. Maverick led Isabella out to the back of the pub, into the empty courtyard. What's this place? Isabella asked, eyeing the brick walls and the couple of barrels scattered in the very empty courtyard. Maverick chuckled, walking up to the front wall and pulling out his wand. Watch! Just as he was about to tap the wall, a voice called from outside. Just a moment, please. The voice carried a heavy British accent. Maverick and Isabella turned to see a middle-aged woman entering the courtyard. She wore a green robe and a pointy hat, her outfit practically shouting, I'm a witch. Thank you, the woman said before turning around and gesturing with her hand. Hurry up. The sun won't wait all day. A moment later, another figure stepped through the door. A little girl dressed in normal Muggle clothing. The woman turned back to Maverick and Isabella. Thank you, she said with a polite smile. Maverick smiled back. It's nothing. He turned again, raising his wand. As he tapped the wall in a circular pattern, the woman took a good look at Maverick and Isabella. When he finished, Maverick glanced at Isabella, curious to see her reaction. The bricks began to twist and shift, rearranging themselves into an arched entrance. To his disappointment, there was no amazement on Isabella's face. She simply raised an eyebrow and looked at him. What? You do realize I'm a witch, right? Long before. Ahaha. Maverick laughed nervously, cutting her off. He should have expected this lack of surprise from Isabella. But he couldn't help it. He had been blown away the first time he saw the magic. However, the little girl who had come with the woman looked utterly awestruck. Brilliant! She exclaimed, her wide eyes glued to the entrance. The three of them glanced at her, amused. Well, yes. Welcome to Diagon Alley, the woman said to the girl with a warm smile. The heart of magical Britain. She then turned to Maverick and Isabella. Are you both foreigners? I am. He's not, Isabella answered quickly, pointing to Maverick before he could speak. A British Muggle? The woman asked, raising an eyebrow at Maverick. Scratching his head, Maverick let out a small pulse of suppressed magic, just enough to dispel any doubts. The woman's eyes widened in shock. Such precise magical energy manipulation. I've never heard of someone so young at the great Magus rank. Maverick instantly regretted his decision. Seeing his reaction, the woman softened, realizing she might have overstepped. Ah, forgive me. I never meant to pry, young man. Maverick quickly waved his hand, brushing it off. It's fine. I'm no great magus. Just a little better at concealing my magic, he explained, thinking quickly of a plausible reason. He had no intention of revealing his advanced ability in magical energy manipulation to anyone outside his circle just yet. A little? The woman thought, doubtful. She wasn't sure even she could suppress her magic with such ease. From what she could sense, even with just magic suppression, Maverick's control over magical energy manipulation was at least as good as hers. But in the end, she decided not to press the matter. Prying into someone else's magic, in her view, was very rude, and she wasn't the type to do that. Quickly brushing off her curiosity, she gave a small smile and said, I'm Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Gesturing toward the little girl beside her, she added, This is Skylar Woodley, one of our new first years starting this term. This time, it was Maverick's turn to be surprised. Her youthful appearance momentarily threw him off guard. He had read that McGonagall was one of the elite great mages of Britain, and unlike in the Harry Potter books, witches and wizards had longer lifespans the higher their rank. Even Mr. Scamander, nearing 100, only had white hair but looked far younger and healthier than anyone his age should, he thought inwardly. Maverick blinked, quickly recovering from his brief startle, then returned the greeting. I'm Maverick Caesar, and this is Isabella, he said, motioning to her. She's an American witch visiting London for the first time, and I'm just showing her around the magical side of Britain. It's nice to meet you, McGonagall said. nodding and smiling at Maverick and Isabella. "Let's head inside while the sun is still up." Maverick nodded, gave Isabella a quick glance, and then walked in. After half a year, he was back. The bustling shops, the chatter of witches and wizards, and the scent of magical potions filled the air, and the alley still buzzed with its familiar, vibrant energy. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," Maverick said with a smile, giving Isabella a quick glance. "If you're showing her around, you're welcome to join us," McGonagall offered. "I'm here to help young Skylar gather her supplies, so we'll be visiting all the important spots." Maverick figured she probably just wanted to know more about them, or more specifically about him. He thought about it for a moment, then decided it wouldn't hurt. McGonagall seemed like a good person, at least from what he remembered of her. He glanced at Isabella first to make sure she was okay with it, and to his surprise, she was already nodding. He chuckled and replied, "Sure, Mum. Thank you. Call me Professor McGonagall," she said with a smile. "So, Professor," Isabella said as they started walking, "can you tell me a bit about Hogwarts? I've only heard bits and pieces from my Ilvermorny teachers and my dad." McGonagall's smile grew. "Of course," she replied, leading the way with Maverick and Isabella on one side and Skylar on the other. By the time McGonagall had finished briefing them on the sorting and the houses, they had neared Gringotts Bank. "Speaking of," McGonagall glanced at Maverick, "you say you're a British wizard, but I've never seen you at Hogwarts." She paused, then added, "Of course, if it's not convenient to answer." "It's all right, Professor," Maverick interrupted, gesturing with his hands. "I am indeed a British wizard, but I took my exams at Ilvermorny. Just finished my newts not too long ago," he answered vaguely, not revealing too much. "Newts, really? How did you do?" "I'm curious," McGonagall asked, raising an eyebrow. Maverick thought for a moment and decided to answer truthfully. Since his future plans involved Hogwarts, outright lying to the vice principal didn't seem like a good idea. Perfect in transfiguration, charms, and data. Excellent in alchemy and potions." McGonagall's eyes widened. "Perfect in transfiguration? That's the outstanding grade in Britain. Achieving the very best in transfiguration on the newts is extremely rare." Her voice held genuine surprise before shifting to a more regretful tone. "Now I'm jealous that Ilvermorny managed to snatch up such an outstanding student right from under our noses." Maverick scratched his nose, feeling a bit embarrassed. He hadn't realized that a perfect score in transfiguration on the newts was so rare. He probably should have downplayed his transfiguration grade like he had with alchemy and potions, he thought. But what was done was done. They reached the door to Gringotts, and McGonagall glanced at Skylar. "Come, my dear. Let's go exchange the pounds your father gave for galleons." She then looked at Isabella and Maverick. "Will you both be coming?" Maverick glanced at Isabella. "We have a branch in America, so we'll wait outside," she replied, glancing over at a clothing store nearby. "We'll be over there." She pointed to the shop. McGonagall nodded. "We'll see you both in a moment then." She smiled at them before leading Skylar into the bank. After they entered, Maverick turned to Isabella. "I didn't know you were so interested in Hogwarts." Isabella smiled at him. "Who wouldn't be? It's considered the oldest wizarding school in the world, and she's the vice dean." Maverick chuckled. "True, that's what they say in the books, and it really does sound impressive." He raised his elbow toward her and winked. "Shall we?" Isabella glanced at his elbow, confused for a moment. Then, understanding, she blushed and slowly linked her arm with his. The couple began walking slowly toward the shop, enjoying the quiet moment. Maverick couldn't help but chuckle, which only made Isabella more embarrassed. "Come on. I'm still me, Bella," Maverick said, trying to ease her tension. It worked, and she gradually relaxed, letting go of her awkwardness. "I know," she muttered, embracing his arm a little tighter. A short walk later, they reached the shop with the sign that read Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. "Come on. I want to see the difference in British magical fashion," Isabella said, dragging Maverick inside. The shop was obviously larger on the inside, filled with shades of pink. The curtains, walls, and even many of the robes on display were all in that color. There weren't many people inside, just a couple of witches, and no wizards in sight. They spent a while browsing, with Isabella trying on robes and dresses, while Maverick offered feedback on each one. To be honest, she looked beautiful in everything she tried on. Not long after, McGonagall and Skylar entered the shop after their visit to the bank. Isabella immediately continued the conversation with McGonagall, while Skylar had her school uniform and robes measured. During their talk, Maverick quietly used a bit of illusion magic to secretly buy the dress he liked the most for Isabella, packed it away and stored it in his ring. After the robe shop, they moved on to Ollivander's wand shop and then the bookstore. Isabella asked as many questions as she could think of, and McGonagall answered happily. It seemed like she would never grow tired of talking about Hogwarts. McGonagall didn't forget about her student, making sure to include Skylar in the conversation. Skylar was lucky, as McGonagall was giving her a first-hand, exclusive look into Hogwarts, offering more insight than most other Muggle-born newcomers would receive. Maverick tagged along, occasionally asking a question of his own, learning a bit more about the famous school. Besides that, he had been quietly buying items Isabella seemed to like whenever she showed interest as they walked, occasionally stopping by the stalls. His teacher's illusion spell had become his most versatile tool, not only for surprise attacks but even more so for managing things covertly. The spell was particularly effective because, without the victim realizing they were under its influence, there was no reliable way to break free. Since his actions didn't directly affect anyone else, even McGonagall, the great magus herself, had no idea she'd been ensnared by it. Their last stop was the pet store, where Maverick also wanted to buy a messenger bird for himself. The shop, named Magical Menagerie, was located on the north side of Diagon Alley. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. The place was cramped and noisy, with every inch of wall covered by cages. The scent of animals seemed to permeate the air, making it impossible to ignore. All sorts of magical creatures were on display. Streelers, fire crabs, sleek black rats known for their intelligence, owls, ravens, cats of every color, puffskeins, transforming rabbits, and many more. McGonagall took Skylar to pick out a pet, leaving Maverick and Isabella to explore the shop on their own. "Do you want to get a pet?" Isabella asked, noticing the look of interest on Maverick's face. Maverick nodded. "Yes, a messenger owl. I want to stay in touch with you while I'm traveling the world." Isabella blushed slightly, a shy smile spreading across her lips. What Maverick missed most from his previous life was the ease of communication using smartphones. He already had plans to change that, not just in the non-magical world but in the magical one as well. However, those plans were for the future, after he had firmly established himself in both worlds. He had no intention of limiting his influence to the magical community alone. Maverick planned to work both sides, using his knowledge of the future to bring innovations to people long before the original inventors. He didn't feel guilty about disrupting the profits of big corporations. It wasn't stealing from regular people, just getting ahead of the rich and powerful. The world he was in had more than one Doomsday-level event ahead, as far as he could recall. Voldemort would end up looking like a beginner boss, a small-time threat, compared to the real nightmares to come. "Look!" Isabella called, walking quickly toward a cage that held a beautiful black owl. Maverick followed, and indeed the bird was stunning. She was pure black, with a few brownish-yellow feathers at the tips of her tail and wings, and eyes as red as blood. "Ah, one of the new arrivals, just in today. Very intelligent, I must say. I don't think she'll be here by the end of tomorrow." An old man's voice came from the side. They turned to see a man who clearly looked like he needed a shower walking toward them. "Is it a barred owl?" Maverick asked, turning back to observe the bird again, this time using his magical sense to get a clearer read on its magic. Yes, all magical animals had a touch of magic, which made them not only stronger than regular animals but also more intelligent. Even the simplest magical creatures, like a frog, were as smart as the most intelligent trained dogs. "Not exactly," the man replied, stopping a little way off but still close to them. "She's a hybrid, you see, part Eastern Crimson Owl and part Barred Owl. Both are very intelligent magical species," he added with a nod. Maverick glanced at Isabella, silently seeking her opinion. He really liked the bird, and from his quick probe, he could sense it had a significantly larger magical reserve than any other animal in the store. "She's really pretty," Isabella said, glancing at him before leaning closer to the bird. The owl didn't flinch or shy away but bobbed its head up and down, inching closer to Isabella as if agreeing with her comment. "Hee hee, and very smart too." Isabella chuckled at its reaction. Maverick smiled. He could tell the bird understood Isabella's words clearly. All magical animals, especially owls, had the ability to understand wizards and witches to some extent, and with a bit of training, this ability could be further enhanced. Maverick turned back to the man. "Are you the shopkeeper here, sir?" The man smiled, I'm the owner, young man. He paused and gestured to the owl hybrid. I see you both have taken a liking to her. Maverick nodded. Yes, I'd like to purchase her. Excellent, the man said, clapping his hands. Come, let's finalize the payment, and I'll transfer the magical bond with the owl. Maverick smiled, then glanced at Isabella and gave her a thumbs up. To be honest, he was more excited than his expression let on about getting his first magical pet. Isabella smiled back. Congratulations, she added. They quickly completed the purchase, and the owner transferred the magical bond of the owl to Maverick. As soon as the connection was established, Maverick could feel it. A bond with the owl, and the bird glanced at him, acknowledging the link. Maverick then bought a new cage, slightly bigger than the current one, and asked the owl to move in. The bird complied as the very intelligent creature it was. Holding the cage, Maverick glanced at Isabella. Let's give her a name. Isabella quickly shook her head. It's your first magical pet. You should name her. Maverick thought for a moment and didn't argue. Then he came up with the perfect name. With feathers as black as night, perfect for camouflage in the darkness, he smiled. Let's call you Shui. Isabella gave him a puzzled glance. Maverick chuckled. Don't mind the details, but it's a nice name, right? Isabella sighed helplessly. It was a strange name to her, but she nodded. Yes, it sounds nice. Maverick grinned widely, showing all his teeth, and Isabella couldn't help but smile back. She could see how truly happy Maverick was. Not long after, McGonagall returned with Skylar, who had an owl of her own, the one she had chosen as her pet. They talked a little longer, exchanging stories, Maverick and Isabella sharing their own, while McGonagall told tales of Hogwarts, as they continued walking through Diagon Alley. Eventually, McGonagall decided it was time to head back, as the sun was beginning to set, and she wanted to take Skylar back to her Muggle family. McGonagall let out a sigh. Truly, I would have loved for you both to have chosen Hogwarts. You're both very smart and disciplined. Much more so than many of the troublemakers I had to deal with. She glanced at Skylar. Hopefully, you won't be one of them. The little girl, Skylar, shook her head frantically. I'll behave, Professor McGonagall. Maverick and Isabella chuckled. Well, it was nice meeting you, Maverick said, then paused. He thought about mentioning his interest in joining Hogwarts after 2 years. Since he had met McGonagall by chance today, he wanted to bring it up with her, but he hesitated, wondering if it was too soon. And seeing that Maverick wanted to say something more, McGonagall waited, offering no interruption. She had grown quite fond of both Maverick and Isabella during their brief meeting and the conversations they had shared. Maverick finally decided to go for it. He had always liked McGonagall's character from the books, and this first meeting had left a good impression on him. I want to apply for a teaching position at Hogwarts after I gain more experience. Maybe in 2 years, he said. McGonagall raised an eyebrow, silently asking him to elaborate. Well, my plan is to travel around the world next, exploring the magic of different wizarding cultures. I'm also very interested in Muggle science, so I have this idea for a book. Something to bring little witches and wizards closer to the normal world by explaining the wonders of Muggle science. That sounds wonderful, McGonagall replied. I would love to read it. Be sure to send me a copy when you're done, young man. Maverick smiled. Of course, Professor. I have this goal, but maybe you'll say it's not possible. Please, tell me, McGonagall said, her tone encouraging. I would love to offer my input. It's wonderful to have an ambition, as long as it's for the benefit of everyone. Well, my goal is to educate Wizarding Britain, which is why I want to become a teacher. Maverick glanced at Skylar before whispering with magic, so only McGonagall and Isabella could hear. I want to challenge their prejudices, to end the discrimination and racism that noble British wizards have against Muggleborns. He paused and then spoke normally. I plan to join Hogwarts as a teacher after 2 years, maybe as a Muggle studies teacher, or even a new subject like science and magic and their similarities. Maverick observed McGonagall's expression carefully as he spoke. She showed a hint of shock before regaining her composure, but Maverick could see the careful control in her expression. McGonagall paused, thinking carefully. That's a very noble ambition. Your approach sounds good so far. Believe me, there have been attempts by a few already, but they were either too radical or not enough. She sighed. I wish you good luck, young man. Truly. And please don't forget to send me a copy of your book. I'm now very interested. I would love to work with you as a colleague at Hogwarts. Maverick smiled. A small part of his future plans had been set in motion now that he had shared some with McGonagall. It would be easier to secure a teaching position at Hogwarts. Thank you, Professor. That means a lot, Maverick said sincerely. McGonagall then took a note from her ring and handed it to Maverick. My address. You can write to me with any questions, and I'll respond. Maverick took it gratefully. McGonagall then glanced at Isabella. It was lovely talking to you, dear. I wish you good luck in your newt years. And don't focus too much on romance just yet. She gave them a motherly glare. Isabella blushed and nodded, and Maverick felt a bit embarrassed as well. McGonagall truly lived up to her reputation. They said their goodbyes, and McGonagall took Skylar back, giving her the first uncomfortable experience of apparition. Maverick and Isabella began walking slowly toward the entrance they had arrived from, enjoying the crimson sunset sky and the peacefulness of the moment. The bustling streets of Diagon Alley had calmed down significantly, though many witches and wizards still walked about, just not as many as when they first arrived. I had a great time. Thank you. Isabella spoke quietly as they walked, their hands intertwined. Maverick smiled. Me too. A moment of silence passed. Then Isabella spoke again. Remember to write to me. It's okay if it's not too frequent, but at least whenever you visit a new country. She gave him a glance. Maverick glanced back and gestured to Shursway in the cage. Promise. Shursway here will be very busy over the next 2 years. Isabella looked at the new feathery companion. When you put it like that, I feel a little guilty. Maverick chuckled. She's strong. I can feel it from her magic. Isabella nodded. Our moms should be back by now. Dad and the teacher will probably be late tonight, Maverick said. Isabella hummed. What'll we do tonight? Want to grab dinner at a fancy Muggle restaurant? Just the two of us, Maverick suggested. Isabella glanced at him, then ahead. Our moms might want to come. You want them to? Maverick asked. No. It'll just be us, Isabella said. Maybe tomorrow we can all go together. Maverick chuckled lightly and smiled. Yeah. They soon reached the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron. Stopping for a moment, Maverick glanced at Isabella, who was now hugging his arm with both hands, her head lightly resting on his shoulder. Let's go home, he said softly. After another hour's drive, Maverick and Isabella returned from their visit to Diagon Alley. They saw the car their mothers had taken, but just as Maverick had guessed, their fathers were still out doing their own thing. When they entered, they found both mothers busy in the kitchen, likely preparing dinner for the evening. Thankfully, they didn't ask many questions and simply told them to relax and wait. It was a clear sign of their trust in their children. It wasn't until 8 in the evening that Edward and Michael returned home. The two families sat down to enjoy dinner together, sharing stories about their day. As it turned out, Michael and Edward had won a significant amount of money betting on the Manchester football game. Since Edward's family was leaving the next evening, they made plans for the following day at the dinner table, making sure everyone had a say and that the activities would be enjoyable for all. By 10 o'clock, everyone had headed to bed for the night. The next day began with all 6 gathered around the breakfast table. Midway through the meal, a wizard arrived with a package addressed to Maverick. True to his word, Minister of Magic Fudge had fulfilled his promise, completing Maverick's paperwork without Maverick having to set foot in the ministry. The British Wizarding Identity Card resembled a Muggle ID, a system the wizarding world had adopted from Muggles since World War II to more effectively track their populations. Edward used several spells and methods to scan the card for any hidden tracking or spying charms, and only after that did he hand it over to Maverick. The card was strongly enchanted to protect it from accidental damage, whether from natural or magical elements, could withstand pressure, fire, or cold, as long as they weren't extreme. More importantly, the enchantments were there to prevent replication and identity fraud, as the card contained personal details like name, age, country, and more. The card also included his ultra-fast broomstick license. During lunch with the Queen, Edward spoke highly of Maverick's skills. He didn't share every detail but gave just enough for Fudge to understand that Maverick was very talented, and reassured him that Maverick would have no issues controlling such a powerful broomstick. Trusting Edward's word, along with the fact that Edward had the authority to grant the permit for the license, Fudge agreed without hesitation to add the detail to Maverick's card. With the card, Maverick now had access to numerous conveniences of the wizarding world, including the national and international public flu networks, business registration, buying or selling properties in magical areas, obtaining licenses for various practices, and more. After breakfast, they began the first activity planned for the day, giving Michael and Ariel some hands-on experience with magic. And what better way to start than taking to the skies? Using muggle-repellent spells, Edward, Maverick, and Isabella took Michael, Ariel, and Sylvia flying on their broomsticks all around London. Needless to say, the three non-magicals had the time of their lives, especially Maverick's mother, who was completely new to magic. Their fun lasted until late afternoon, after which they returned to rest for a bit before heading out again. This time for some shopping, followed by a family dinner at a 5-star restaurant. The two families' dinner was only slightly awkward for Maverick and Isabella when their parents brought up their relationship. It wasn't a long discussion, just some general advice, reminders that they were still young and should focus on their education and careers more. The adults all agreed that Maverick and Isabella would get engaged in 2 years when they were freer from other commitments. Although embarrassed, both Maverick and Isabella happily agreed. They returned home around 10 in the evening, as Edward's family planned to flew back at midnight. After arriving, Maverick and Isabella took some time for themselves, heading straight to the skies together. During their private moment, Maverick handed Isabella the gifts he had secretly purchased the day before, asking her to open them only after she returned to the States. With promises to stay in touch and a few heartfelt hugs and kisses, they reluctantly made their way back. Before taking the flu, Edward pulled Maverick aside for a private moment, reminding him to always remain vigilant during his travels and stressing that the world is often more dangerous than it appears. He also urged Maverick to never hesitate in using the reverse port key to summon him if he ever faced a life-threatening emergency beyond his ability to handle. With a burst of green flames, Edward, Sylvia, and Isabella disappeared into the flu, returning to America. For a moment, Maverick and his family stood in silence, feeling a sense of loss. The past 2 days had been filled with joy, and the bond of friendship between their families had grown even stronger over the years. Well, don't look so down. We can always visit them again in the future, Michael said, pulling his wife and son closer with an arm around each of them. He turned to Maverick with a small grin. And you, kid, get some sleep. We've got to visit the Queen again tomorrow. He carefully avoided mentioning the Zero Squad, knowing the name alone hinted at combat-related work. The last thing he wanted was to make his wife worry. Maverick nodded, reminded that he still had his orientation with the Zero Squad before beginning his journey. Surprisingly, he was looking forward to it. Beyond learning the group's rules and obligations and meeting the other members, the training aspect especially intrigued him. The Queen had assured him it would be brief, just 2 weeks to familiarize himself with the team, undergo some basic training, and then he'd be free to start his travels. What excited him most was the chance to train in Muggle combat methods, especially learning to handle firearms. The idea of blending magical and non-magical skills intrigued him. Yes, Maverick was looking forward to it. Earlier the same day, inside Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore sat behind his large oak desk, quietly going through some papers. The firelight in the room cast a soft glow, creating a calm atmosphere as he read with calm concentration. His robe, a rich midnight blue adorned with intricate silver embroidery, flowed gracefully around him, exuding both elegance and authority. Beneath the robe, he wore a gray sleeveless vest over a clean white shirt, adding a simple touch of style. His dark hair, neatly combed and streaked with silver, remained full and well-kept, while his beard, more black than expected from someone over a century old, added a dignified weight to his appearance. The first thing anyone would notice was his left arm, completely wrapped in white gauze. From the wrist up, it was hidden beneath the sleeve of his robe, but still noticeable. A careful observer might spot the slight twitching of his fingers, a sign of discomfort, perhaps even pain. However, it did nothing to affect the famed wizard's expression, which remained steady, nor did it diminish his domineering presence. Every movement, every glance was deliberate, reflecting the power and wisdom he held as headmaster. He exuded a commanding yet serene aura, striking a perfect balance of authority and warmth, which had come to define him as the leader of the wizarding world. Nearby, perched on its stand, Fawkes, his loyal phoenix, observed silently. Its glowing plumage cast a soft light across the room, a gentle reminder of the magic that filled Hogwarts. He paused, lifting his head, and a smile spread across his face. Moments later, the door to the headmaster's office opened, and in walked his trusted companion, once a student, now his assistant, or perhaps even his second-in-command. I trust everything went well, Minerva, he said, leaning back in his chair. Tea, he added while gesturing for her to sit. No, thank you, McGonagall said as she took a seat. The introduction for all Muggle-born first years has concluded. She paused, her tone softening. You must commend Hagrid, Albus. He managed the orientation far quicker than any of us. Dumbledore chuckled warmly. I shall. Perhaps I'll consider upgrading his little cottage. Hagrid would never accept extra pay for it. He's far too modest. McGonagall hummed softly, her thoughts then drifting to the day before. She had met two remarkable people, Maverick and Isabella, and thought warmly of their conversations. For a moment, she considered mentioning it but hesitated. Dumbledore, as sharp as ever, noticed the change right away. Go on, Minerva, he said kindly. Is there something on your mind? She glanced at him, weighing her decision, before giving a slight nod. Maverick had expressed interest in joining Hogwarts, so she decided there was no harm in telling the headmaster. I met a rather intriguing young couple yesterday, an American witch and a local wizard, she began, pausing briefly. Dumbledore made no move to interrupt, instead gesturing for her to continue. The young witch is of age to start her 6th year, while the wizard, well, he recently completed his newts. Both of them are exceptionally talented, she continued, sharing more about their exam results and some of the conversations they'd had. Dumbledore listened with interest, making no interruptions until McGonagall paused briefly. For you to speak so highly of them, Minerva, they must be quite extraordinary, Dumbledore remarked. McGonagall nodded firmly. They are, particularly the boy. His mastery of magical energy manipulation is so advanced that, at first, I mistook him for a muggle. Dumbledore's usual calm demeanor shifted slightly, surprise flickering across his face. Muggle? What led you to think that? At first I thought he was. I couldn't sense even the faintest trace of magic from him. It was only when I asked him that he pulsed his energy, she explained, her excitement growing. She glanced at Dumbledore. Albus. It was extraordinary. He controlled it with such ease, as naturally as breathing. The precision, the sheer effortlessness. I've never seen anything like it. Her voice grew more animated. Even I doubt I could suppress my magic to that degree, let alone with such finesse as to fool me entirely. McGonagall stopped, realizing she had gotten carried away, and glanced at Dumbledore to gauge his reaction. The headmaster appeared deep in thought. After a moment, he asked, Are you sure he isn't a great magus? Absolutely certain. I fully sensed his magic when he released it briefly, even though the boy carefully controlled it for a moment. And I've never heard of a great magus, alive or dead, at such a young age. After a brief silence, Dumbledore spoke thoughtfully. But it's quite unheard of, a magus with such precise magical energy manipulation. He paused, then added, What about the girl? Was she as remarkable as him? She's only 16, McGonagall replied. But I could sense it. She's on the verge of advancing to magus level. A genius, then. Only a handful of people I know have achieved such a feat at her age, Dumbledore said with a wistful sigh. How marvelous. Two exceptional young magicals from different nations finding affection for one another. His gaze grew distant as he reminisced about a certain individual. Albus, McGonagall interjected, bringing him back to the present. That's not all. Really? He asked, his curiosity growing. Please, Minerva, do tell. The boy mentioned that he would like to become a teacher here at Hogwarts, she revealed. Dumbledore raised a brow. Not immediately, McGonagall clarified. He plans to travel the world first, to learn, gather experience, and then, in a few years, apply for a teaching position. Dumbledore stroked his chin. A teaching position in what field? Muggle science, McGonagall said, her tone tinged with amusement. Dumbledore tilted his head. Don't we already have a Muggle studies professor? McGonagall gave him a pointed look. You and I both know the current curriculum is hopelessly outdated. She paused. And that's Muggle studies, not Muggle science. A new course? That would be difficult, Dumbledore said after a moment of thought. He mentioned he's working on a book to introduce, and I quote, the magic of science. Dumbledore chuckled softly. And what exactly is this magic? From what he explained, his book will introduce real science, its wonders and its connections to magic. He promised to send me a copy once it's finished. Well, I'd very much like to read it myself, Dumbledore said with genuine interest. Science has always fascinated me, especially in the past few decades. He paused, briefly recalling some unpleasant memories, but quickly shook them off and continued. A talented genius with a rational approach to this subject. I welcome it. I'll even propose to the school board and the ministry to adjust the curriculum. He paused, smiling at McGonagall, who now looked a little surprised. Do share the book with me, Minerva. If he's serious about teaching here, I'll need to assess his qualifications myself. McGonagall's surprise came from realizing that Dumbledore had likely guessed the true purpose behind Maverick's book. Since Dumbledore had already partially figured it out, she decided not to mention Maverick's comments about challenging the outdated pureblood ideologies. Do you know their origins? Whether they're related to any ancient families? Dumbledore asked after a moment of silence. McGonagall shot him a sharp look. No, Albus, I do not. Their eyes met, holding each other's gaze for a brief moment. Dumbledore sighed, his voice heavy with resignation. Minerva. But McGonagall cut him off, knowing him all too well. It's best the boy takes the initiative himself. There's no need for either of us to intervene, she said plainly, her tone making her stance clear. For all the good in him, the man had one big flaw. He was too nosy. It was the root of most of his troubles. Dumbledore sighed after a moment, a faint smile spreading across his lips. I understand, Minerva. Old habits. She kept her eyes on him, watching the Archmagus like she was judging one of her students. She wanted to make sure the headmaster understood her meaning clearly. Seeing he wasn't pressing further, McGonagall gave a final nod and changed the subject. How was your trip to Nepal? Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, pausing to think for a moment. Not very successful, he replied, his tone low and mixed with regret and reluctance. McGonagall's expression fell, her concern evident as her gaze shifted from Dumbledore to his covered left arm. Not even the Supreme Sorcerer could cure Riddle's curse. Dumbledore sighed. Well, she did offer a solution. It just wasn't to my liking. Your liking? McGonagall straightened, frustration rising in her voice. Albus, you're dying. Merlin knows how much time you have left, and you're still holding on to your principles. Dumbledore sat quietly, not minding McGonagall's raised voice. He knew she was only worried about him. His thoughts drifted to the serious problem he now faced and how he had come to this point. It all began with a prophecy, but after the events that followed, Dumbledore wasn't fond of the outcome it foretold. The most recent Dark Lord, Voldemort, had somehow made himself partially immortal by splitting his soul. Dumbledore first realized this 9 years ago when he saw the infant responsible for the Dark Lord's downfall. The infant, saved by his guardian's sacrifice and powerful ancient magic, was meant to live a very short life. That night, when Voldemort fell, powerful magic from both sides was involved. Needless to say, Voldemort's magic was pure evil. As a result, the infant was left with a terrible consequence. Since then, Dumbledore had focused all his efforts on studying the evil magic leeching the infant, hoping to find a cure. He had wished for the best, but his relentless curiosity and need to understand led him to his current predicament. His research led him to a situation similar to that of the infant, tracing back to Voldemort's origins, the Dark Lord's family ring. But it wasn't just any heirloom. No, it held a deeper significance, one that drew Dumbledore in. Throughout his life, he had lost so much, and the ring's allure was irresistible. Despite his wisdom, he made a naive mistake and fell right into a trap. The ring was cursed. The moment he saw it, his desire took over, and he was struck by a curse that the Dark Lord had placed on it. Now the Archmagus, whose lifespan should have lasted for centuries, was quickly dying, his life force being drained by the curse, with no cure yet to be found. McGonagall watched her longtime friend lost in thought, a regretful expression on his face. More than anything, she wished for Dumbledore to be cured. He was the one who had mentored her and contributed the most to the life she lived now. After a few minutes, Dumbledore shook off his thoughts and regained his composure. Apologies, Minerva. I just remembered some old memories. McGonagall didn't ask what they were, but returned to her previous question. Can you at least tell me why you rejected the Sorcerer Supreme's solution? Dumbledore thought for a moment before deciding to share. Sacrifices. One that could equal an Archmagus or many others combined. And he paused, hesitated, then spoke. The solution came from the darkest of scriptures. Have you heard of the Darkhold? McGonagall frowned, thinking hard, but nothing came to mind. A very evil and ancient book of powerful spells, Dumbledore continued. It's believed to be from a powerful demon, Thon. And you must know how much demonology was considered taboo for us witches and wizards, even by Merlin himself. McGonagall sighed. I see. She raised her head and glanced at Dumbledore before asking again. Is there really no other way? Dumbledore met her gaze. There is another. One that I think could cure it. McGonagall's eyes lit up. Really, Albus? Dumbledore raised his hand, gesturing for her to calm down. It's possible, but I'm not very sure. And it's not easy. He paused. I'd have to surpass my current rank and reach Warlock. McGonagall's eyes widened. But that's not impossible, but difficult. I may have... He paused, thinking. 7, maybe 6 years. Within that time, I'd have to break through. How far are you? I mean, what's your current progress? McGonagall asked. Dumbledore raised his hand, bringing his index finger and thumb so close that they almost touched. This close. The peak of Archmagus. In the East, they call this a bottleneck, a short but nearly impossible hurdle. Unless I can find a way to break through it, or find someone who has reached the Warlock rank for guidance. McGonagall opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. A Warlock was simply a legend in this day and age. The last recorded ones from Europe were the 4 founders of the very school she now managed. She sighed after a moment. If only the founders had left some knowledge of their experiences. Dumbledore gave a warm smile. Well, who knows? Nobody knows what happened to them. They just simply disappeared into history. McGonagall gave Dumbledore a questioning look. What are you suggesting, Albus? Dumbledore chuckled, sitting up straighter. He decided to end the discussion. Let's not talk about my miserable situation. Tell me, have we received any applications for the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor for the coming year? McGonagall gave him a glare. She wanted to ask more but decided to respect her mentor's wishes and let it go. Yes, a French wizard. The 2, headmaster and vice-headmaster, then moved on to discuss school matters. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, Maverick, our protagonist, had no idea that he had come under the radar of the most famous and powerful wizard alive. And even if he had known, he wouldn't have paid much attention to it. His conversations with McGonagall were carefully worded, knowing full well that they would reach Dumbledore sooner or later. A coincidence, perhaps, but one he had taken full advantage of, for his future goal of joining Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Whoosh! A fist shot toward Maverick's chest. Maverick sidestepped, the punch missing by inches. He spun on his heel to dodge the next swing, then hopped back lightly onto the platform. Almost had me there, Wilson, he said, a teasing grin on his face. Wilson grunted, both frustrated and annoyed. His silence made it clear this wasn't their first time fighting. Without a word, he lunged again, faster and more aggressively than before. He closed the distance and unleashed a rapid flurry. A jab, a hook, an uppercut. Maverick moved fluidly, ducking and weaving, always staying just out of reach. Every strike from Wilson came close but missed, as if Maverick could read his moves in advance. Undeterred, Wilson pressed harder, his fists flying with speed and power. Maverick calmly blocked a jab with his forearm, sidestepped a hook, and countered with a light shove that sent Wilson stumbling back. Stay still, Wilson snarled, throwing a wild, heavy punch. Maverick's expression showed no concern as he waited for the perfect moment. Then, with a swift leap, he vaulted over Wilson's head and landed gracefully behind him, his balance flawless. Wilson spun to face him, but Maverick was already moving. A sharp kick to the back of Wilson's knee dropped him to the ground. Before he could recover, Maverick pressed a firm hand to his shoulder, pinning him flat. It was over in seconds. Maverick stepped back, relaxed, while Wilson stayed on the floor, catching his breath. You sure you didn't use magic? Wilson grumbled as he accepted Maverick's outstretched hand and got to his feet. Not really, Maverick said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Magic's more like a sixth sense to me. I can't help it. Indeed, his magical sense, honed to advanced proficiency, made dodging instinctive like a passive skill. Coupled that with Edward's movement exercises, even the peak of human agility was no contest, unless it crossed into superhuman levels. All right, that's enough, a sharp voice called out. Maverick and Wilson turned to see a bald man with a sharp face and a lean, athletic build. Dressed in a fitted black shirt and brown combat pants, he stood with his arms crossed over his chest, radiating a commanding presence. With a brief gesture, he motioned for Maverick and Wilson to approach. They were in a large, square room that resembled a training hall. In the center stood a platform where the fight had just taken place. One wall held a rack neatly displaying sharp weapons like knives and daggers, while a few punching bags were scattered in each corner of the room. There were no windows, only a single steel door for entering and exiting. Bright white light from ceiling panels illuminated the entire space. Aside from Maverick and Wilson, 3 others stood near the platform, all dressed in identical combat gear, black shirts and brown pants. The bald man was Philippe, an African-American and the most senior member of the group, as well as Maverick's primary instructor. The other 2 were Justin, a middle-aged Caucasian man with blonde hair similar to Wilson's, and Lee, a younger woman with jet black hair and an Asian complexion. The 3, Wilson, Justin and Lee, were members of the Queen's 00 squad, who were at the moment without a mission, and hence tasked with accelerating Maverick's training. The facility they were in was vast. In addition to the training hall, it featured sections for firearms practice, driving simulations, and a cutting-edge gadgets lab equipped with state-of-the-art carry-on weapons technology, all supported by the UK's top military science and engineering teams. The day after Edward's family returned to America, Maverick's father took him to this secret base somewhere in London for his brief orientation with the 00 squad, an elite unit under the Queen's direct command, which Maverick had previously agreed to join, but only under very strict conditions. Initially, Maverick planned a 2-week timeline for this, but a month and a half has passed. It wasn't that the training was overwhelming. In fact, he had very quickly demonstrated exceptional skill in nearly all the practical exercises, including hand-to-hand combat and firearms training. His advanced magical sense talent was practically a cheat, and combined with the reflexes he had honed from the movement exercises he did while training with Edward, he was able to grasp everything pretty quickly. What ultimately compelled Maverick to extend his training with the 00 squad were the extensive skills they offered in covert operations, including infiltration, intelligence gathering, and a range of strategic elimination methods. In addition to gathering intelligence, Maverick also learned advanced skills in human psychology and reading microexpressions, skills that were not only useful in the moment but could also remain important as he became stronger in the future. Therefore, delaying the start of his 2-year journey by a month had been far from a waste. His instructor, Philippe, along with the 3 other members and the regular agents at the base, had trained him hard in every part of their craft. This training had turned him into a skilled and disciplined operative, and even without magic, he had become a strong and capable individual, much like a well-trained soldier. "Wilson nearly had me there, Serge," Maverick said, walking over to the rest of the team. "Bullshit. You weren't even breaking a sweat," Wilson retorted. Maverick scratched his nose, offering a sheepish smile. It really was no contest, and everyone there knew it. "All right, let's wrap up," Philippe said, turning his head to look at everyone in the room before his gaze settled on Maverick. 006, are you sure you don't want to extend your training a bit longer? Maverick gave a confident nod. "I think I've got the important stuff down," he said, then paused for a moment. "Dad's picking me up later tonight to meet with Her Majesty." "I see," Philippe replied with a slight nod. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know where to find us. Don't forget your promise, little man." Lee, the sharp-eyed, Asian-looking woman, chimed in with a smile. "We're all counting on you in the future." "That's right, Caesar," Wilson added, smiling as he gave Maverick's shoulder a tug. "You never know when we mortals might need a little saving." Maverick chuckled. "I've got your backs," he said confidently. There was no need for modesty. His tone carried an unspoken understanding that these seasoned agents knew exactly what he was capable of. Though his time with them had been short, Maverick had grown quite fond of the team over the past few weeks. First, there was Lee, a Muggle-born genius who had graduated from Hogwarts and was now in her early 30s. She had answered the Queen's recruitment request and become a magical member of the 00 squad, following the loss of 2 others a decade ago in the chaos caused by Voldemort. Maverick was now the 4th magical member, the most recent addition to their ranks. Wilson and Justin were a few years older than Lee, but they were regular humans. They didn't typically involve themselves with the extraordinary, but that didn't mean they took on easy tasks. Maverick had gone through the records of the missions they completed, studying the dangers they'd faced, and he couldn't help but admire how they constantly risked their lives to keep the country safe. Beyond all that, they were genuinely nice people. His magical sense told him as much. There were no signs of negative emotions like jealousy, resentment, or the bitterness that usually followed when a younger, less experienced person joined a seasoned team. From day one, they had all welcomed him and treated him with proper respect. "Let's go grab some shots before Caesar heads off," Justin suggested after everyone had their say. "The kid's not old enough to drink, 003. Philippe reminded him with a raised eyebrow. Justin rolled his eyes. "The kid's old enough to have a license to kill. Besides, he's a magical." "He's right," Lee chimed in with a shrug. "Muggle liquor doesn't do much to us anyway." Philippe hesitated, eyeing Maverick for a moment. But considering it was his last day training with them, he finally relented. "All right, let's meet on the roof after a shower." No need," Maverick grinned, snapping his fingers. A gust of wind whipped through the group, followed by a sudden rush of water. In seconds, their sweat-covered bodies and gear were spotless. "Honestly, I really envy you magicals," Justin muttered, shaking his head. "You make everything look so easy." The group collectively sighed, even Lee. Though she was much older and a genius in her own right, she still relied on a wand and chanting, unlike Maverick, for whom it was as simple as breathing. "Well, looks like we've got more time now," Wilson said, shrugging as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Later, Maverick, codenamed 006, joined Wilson, 004, Justin, 003, Lee, 009, and their instructor Philippe on the compound's rooftop for drinks and lighthearted conversation. The group exchanged stories, jokes, and some laughs, strengthening their bond in a rare moment of downtime. Just before wrapping up the gathering, Maverick glanced around at the team with a sincere expression. "I just want to say thanks to all of you for the guidance and support these past few weeks. You've all been incredible. And just so you know, I've got your backs, always. If you ever need anything, even outside of work, don't hesitate to reach out." He spoke sincerely and with confidence. The entire team smiled, a shared sense of trust, gratitude, and respect filling the air as they clinked their glasses together one last time before Maverick made his departure. A few hours later, Michael arrived to pick Maverick up for his meeting with the Queen, officially marking the end of his brief orientation with the 00 squad. Before the day's sun had fully set, they arrived once again at Buckingham Palace. Maverick and Michael entered the same room where they had met a few weeks ago. This time, however, Jacob and Joanna were no longer hidden under disillusionment. They stood at the Queen's left and right, who sat at the same table as before, her dignified presence unchanged. Maverick and his father took their seats across from the Queen. On the table, a collection of gadgets and weapons were neatly arranged. The Queen glanced at Maverick, meeting his eyes with a small smile before getting straight to the point. "Well, I take it you've been briefed on everything by now?" Maverick nodded. "Yes, ma'am." This was how the squad members addressed the Queen, rather than using the usual royal title. "Instructor Philippe and the rest of the team have walked me through everything I needed." Michael, sitting beside Maverick, remained silent. He was simply there to accompany his son. "Good," the Queen said, her gaze shifting to her right. 002. At the Queen's signal, Jacob stepped forward, offering a brief nod of respect before focusing on Maverick. 006. He began, getting straight to the point. "These are the standard weapons and gadgets issued to every member of the 00 squad." He picked up the rifle first. Sleek, matte black, and incredibly imposing, it radiated power. "AW-85 sniper rifle," he began, his voice steady. "Chambered in .50 BMG, 12.7 mm caliber. It has a range of 1.5 kilometers, with a box magazine that holds 5 rounds. Jacob turned the rifle slightly, showcasing its streamlined design, then met Maverick's eyes. "This is not a toy. Keep it in your storage ring unless you need to use it. You'll be provided with enough ammo for the job." Maverick nodded, absorbing the details before waiting for the next item. Jacob set the sniper rifle down and picked up a sleek handgun, giving another brief but thorough explanation. He followed this by presenting several sharp weapons, each one designed for efficiency. Finally, he reached for a collection of electronic gadgets. "Now," Jacob began, holding up a phone-like device. "We both know that magic and electronics don't mix well." Yet, Maverick could clearly see the device was active, its screen glowing despite the usual interference magic would cause. "However," Jacob continued, noticing Maverick's attention, "elite great magus like myself can make it work." He paused, studying Maverick's unsurprised expression before nodding with a hint of approval. "To prevent magical interference," I'm guessing you've heard of it, maybe from Speaker Edward. Maverick nodded in response. Edward had indeed mentioned it, and Maverick had tested it himself. Moreover, his mastery of magical energy manipulation and magical sense had already been shared with the Queen and the 00 squad members, so he had no intention of hiding it. Yes, sir. Suppressing magic while in contact with electronics prevents interference, allowing magicals to use electronic equipment, he replied calmly, meeting Jacob's gaze. Jacob nodded. Exactly. So, apart from me and 008 here, you are the third magical who can act solo on missions. Other witches and wizards within the British Muggle government all have a Muggle partner because they can't use phones or other electronic communication devices. He paused before continuing. But even so, remember, highly concentrated magical locations or magically extended spaces will still interfere with any electrical signals. With a flick of his wrist, Jacob levitated the phone above his hand, and its light immediately flickered before going out. The phone floated over to Maverick, who took it without hesitation. Turn it on, Jacob instructed. Maverick did as told, and the gadget powered back on. His magical energy had been suppressed instinctively, so there was no need to concentrate on it. Jacob's eyes gleamed momentarily as he observed Maverick. He knew Maverick was good, but seeing it firsthand, the ridiculous control he showcased at such a young age, still surprised him. Keep it on with you at all times, he said flatly, outwardly showing no emotion, and moved on to the next gadget. Maverick nodded, then paused as a thought occurred to him. What about places like Hogwarts? Will I be able to use it there? Jacob shook his head, his expression neutral. Probably not. Hogwarts sits atop a highly magic-concentrated area, and there are wards and altered spaces all over. You might catch a signal in a few open areas, but for the most part, it won't work. Maverick nodded again, already suspecting the answer. One of his earliest and main goals had been to find a way for wizards to use electronics. He had even discussed the issue with his teacher and already gathered a few ideas on where to begin his research. After all, apart from himself, only those at the Great Magus rank and above possessed the ability to manipulate magical energy enough to suppress their magic. This meant that more than 99% of the world's witches and wizards were unable to use electronics in their daily lives. Finding a solution would not only resolve a critical issue for the wizarding world, but also earn him fame and fortune, key pillars for his future ambitions. Jacob continued presenting a few more gadgets before finally reaching the last item. He paused and stepped back, signaling that the Queen would take over from here. The Queen gave Jacob a brief nod before her attention changed to the remaining items on the desk. 3 shiny, official-looking badges rested atop sealed envelopes, and beside them was a single, small booklet. The badges, with their unmistakable designs, clearly resembled those used by law enforcement, while the booklet was unmistakably a passport. The Queen placed her hand on one of the badges and fixed her gaze on Maverick. United Kingdom Criminal Investigation Department CID, she explained, her voice calm and straight to the point. Commander rank, with the corresponding clearance level. She paused and gestured to the second badge. This one, Military Intelligence, Section 6. MI6 Agent Credentials. Her hand moved to the third item. It was red and gold, its design more ornate than official. This signifies your agent status in the 00 squad, she said, her tone measured and precise. It will be invaluable, both within the military and when working with international agencies. If there was one thing Maverick appreciated most about Queen Elizabeth, it was her no-nonsense approach. She didn't waste time. She didn't leave you hanging. She always got straight to the point. She sat up straighter, her tone changing slightly. With these, most doors will open for you. I trust you've been briefed on everything over the past few weeks, so I won't go into the details. Maverick nodded. He had indeed been thoroughly briefed on everything, from standard operational procedures to the off-the-books protocols. He understood the privileges these identities granted, and just as importantly, the limits of what he could and couldn't do. Finally, she focused on the last item. I know wizards like you can hop across borders with a flick of a wand, she said with a slight smile. But if you ever need to travel the old-fashioned way, this will come in handy. She pushed the passport toward him. This grants you hassle-free travel within NATO, the Commonwealth countries, Europe. Well, you get the idea. Maverick picked it up. The passport was red, much like any other, but he knew this small booklet would be vital for the many tasks he needed to accomplish over the next 2 years. The handover was quick and efficient. Maverick didn't raise any questions. He simply transferred everything into his ring. All he needed to know had already been covered. It was time for the real conversation. This meeting wasn't just for the Queen to present Maverick with impressive weapons and gadgets. She had asked to see him alone, without Edward. Maverick had expected this moment, and he was curious to see if she would ask anything different now that his mentor wasn't present. As an excellent host, Queen Elizabeth had arranged a private dinner. The three of them sat together, engaging in casual conversation, until the Queen finally steered the discussion back to the matter at hand. Once again, she inquired about Maverick's future plans. Maverick's response was unchanged, as he gave the same answer he had before. Then she delved into more serious topics. She asked Maverick what he thought about the magical world, its future, and if it could ever live openly alongside the non-magical world. She even brought up the statute of secrecy, asking if he had any ideas about changing or ending it. These were bold questions she wouldn't dare raise in front of a magical minister or a speaker. Maverick wasn't bothered, though he was a little surprised she asked him. He decided to be even bolder and shared his real thoughts about it. He explained his hypothesis that the statute of secrecy likely wouldn't last another decade, given the rapid advancements in Muggle technology. It would be wiser, he argued, to gradually control the narrative and introduce the magical world to Muggles in a measured way, rather than let the truth explode on the front page of some random newspaper. He then laid out how he would approach this task, explaining his strategy step by step. The Queen listened attentively, occasionally raising questions of her own, while his father too joined in, sharing his own thoughts as they talked. The conversation then shifted to the consequences of such a change. Maverick gave a simple example, comparing it to how nuclear weapons had stopped nations from going to war. He said the magical world had its own kind of deterrence in the form of powerful witches and wizards. Each archmagus, he explained, was akin to a nuclear powerhouse, and no country would dare provoke such strength. This, he explained, would help prevent the chaos that could come from merging the two worlds. The Queen brought up some serious concerns, including the potential trouble from religious extremists. Maverick responded confidently, explaining that the information age was already changing how people thought. Over time, he said, those groups would likely become a small, isolated minority. His honest insights seemed to strike a chord with the Queen. From her expressions and the emotions he picked up on, it was clear she appreciated his openness. The longer they talked, the more Maverick felt like sharing with her. After thinking it over for a moment, he shared some of his ideas for changing the outdated ways of British noble wizards. He explained his approach, detailing how he planned to encourage the nobles to accept Muggle-born wizards and even non-magical individuals. The Queen wholeheartedly supported his vision. She encouraged him, emphasizing that once the magical world inevitably stepped into the open, she didn't want Britain to lag behind as a backward, divided nation. The dinner stretched on for more than 2 hours, covering a wide range of topics. This was her opportunity to ask all the questions, opinions, and requests she hadn't voiced during their first meeting, restrained then by Edward's presence. Maverick answered everything thoroughly, addressing her concerns and expectations. Her requests were reasonable and aligned with the conditions he had set when agreeing to work with her government. As the conversations unfolded, Maverick realized the Queen truly held no prejudice against wizards. She genuinely wanted to bring together all aspects of her nation: magical, non-magical, superhuman, and supernatural. A united nation was her ultimate goal. Of course, she wasn't a saint. There was selfish motive behind it. She would remain the supreme authority of this unified nation. From what Maverick could tell, she also seemed convinced that the wizarding world's secrets wouldn't stay hidden for much longer. It was clear she was already preparing for that eventuality. Before that, the Queen wanted Maverick firmly on her side. By now, she had grasped the scope of Maverick's potential, understanding how powerful he could become. It was evident she saw him as a future trump card, someone who could ensure that even after the magical world stepped out of hiding, she or her descendants would retain ultimate authority over the nation. Maverick's strength, she believed, would be key to keeping that power close to her. Maverick didn't care about any of the politics. He valued order, and her vision aligned with his. He had no desire to rule or concern himself with who governed the nation. In fact, if it were up to him, he'd prefer a non-magical leader to hold supreme authority over both the magical and non-magical sides. After all, wizards were a minority, and they weren't the only ones with extraordinary abilities. More importantly, Maverick firmly believed that technology, not magic, would be the most reliable force for maintaining order in the long run. And even if a future monarch tried to twist things and play dirty politics, Well, Maverick knew how to handle that game too, and he wouldn't leave anything to chance. They dined and talked, their conversation spanning a wide range of topics, until the clock approached 9. Before they parted ways, Maverick offered the Queen a personal reassurance, promising to stand by her side as long as her intentions and actions prioritized the good of the nation, for both magical and non-magical people. This didn't mean Maverick was willing to become a puppet, nor did it suggest he had any sense of nationalist ego. Far from it. He had big plans for the future. Plans that included amassing wealth and building his own force. What he needed most was order, and he knew he had to stay close to the ones enforcing it. The magical side would take time, but Maverick had plans to enter the higher circles of magical authority as well. Everything he did, every decision he made was calculated. But only time would reveal whether his choices today were right or wrong. After the lengthy meeting with the Queen, Maverick and Michael drove straight home. By the time they arrived, it was already 10 in the evening. It had been a month and a half since Maverick had last been home, and before he could get any rest, he knew he had to explain everything to his mother. He didn't outright lie, but it took some careful navigation to convey the truth in a way she would accept. His father was no help. The man simply left it all to him. It was a good thing too. Maverick knew his mother could easily tell when his father was hiding something from her. Before going to bed, Maverick opened the system panel to review the updates. There wasn't much to note, just one spell that had advanced from intermediate to advanced on its own, without the system's help, and a slight increase in his magical energy. His points, however, had grown significantly. It had been some time since he last spent them to give himself an edge. Name: Maverick Caesar. Class: Wizard. Rank: Magus. Magical energy: 903+. Points: 2029. Extraordinary characteristic points: 0. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent grade spellcasting, excellent grade independent expanded dimension. Talents: magical energy manipulation, advanced plus. Magical sense, advanced plus. Transfiguration, advanced plus. Potions, intermediate plus. Alchemy, intermediate plus. Spells: acquired advanced proficiency. Illugio Lunam Lectorum plus, Flipendo plus, Bombarda plus, Expelliarmus plus, Protego plus, Finite plus, Incantatum plus, Petrificus Totalis plus, Stupefy plus, Patronus Charm plus, Episci plus, Reparo plus, Revelio plus, Disillusionment plus, Wingardium Leviosa plus, Occlumency plus, Legilimency plus, Apparition plus, Lumos plus, Pestis Incendium plus, Confundus plus. His points had reached 2,000, and with his magical energy already nearing 1,000, it was only a matter of time before he broke through to the next rank. His plan was to wait until he had accumulated 3,000 points, giving him enough to invest in the new talents he would gain after advancing to Great Magus. What he really wanted now were extraordinary characteristic points. Unfortunately, they only accumulated 1 per year, and he still had more than 3 months before the year ended. The 3 items he received from his teacher, the broomstick, the storage ring, and the bracelet, all had excellent level characteristics that he could copy. The first thing he planned to copy was the broomstick's flight ability, which, in theory, would allow him to fly at incredible speeds. The ring was also excellent grade, but it offered storage and passive mind protection, neither of which he urgently needed. The bracelet, on the other hand, was far more intriguing. It had several useful functions, from invisibility to mana suppression, which he believed could stack with his own similar magic. There was also the full-body suit feature, though how it would function as an extraordinary characteristic remained to be seen until after he copied it. Maverick dismissed the system panel and turned his thoughts inward, reflecting on his plans for the future. It was early October 1989. That meant he had less than 2 years before the events of the plot began. There was so much to do and too little time. His first destination was Australia, from where he planned to travel west to other countries, visiting major magical communities and learning the unique magics of different cultures. Learning magic was the easy part, as with the system it wouldn't take much of his time. There was also the task of writing a book to introduce science to Hogwarts. During his travels, he would review the curricula of different magic schools. If any incorporated Muggle science, he would use them as a reference. If not, he would refer to existing science books and write one himself. With his current abilities, he was confident he could pull it off. At the same time, he would not stop honing the magical talents, especially potions and alchemy. Both were currently at an intermediate level, and he believed he could advance them naturally within a few years. Unfortunately for alchemy, he now had no choice but to use system points to reach advanced proficiency. Alchemy was central to his goal of becoming wealthy in the magical world. For most wizards, tasks and chores were easily handled with a wave of their wand, leaving little incentive for innovation. Maverick aimed to change that. Being from the future gave him countless ideas for magical items that could simplify daily life. Only a small minority of wizards owned house elves. The rest, Maverick estimates 95% of witches and wizards handled chores by themselves. These individuals were his target market. He would first establish a company. He plans to ask help from his teacher, and after he gives his proposal, he was sure Edward would help him endorse. And it won't be for free. He does not plan to further freeload from him. He would give a generous share, even though it may not mean anything to Edward at the start. He planned to introduce products that would automatically handle everyday tasks, such as heating, cooling, washing, and more tasks that typically required spells. Whether magical or not, human nature leaned toward convenience, and Maverick was confident his products would be a success. However, targeting the market of all wizards, rich, poor, and noble, meant more work and a lot of research ahead. Maverick planned to take Muggle inventions, which were already innovative, along with his ideas from the year 2024, and adapt them for the magical world. Unfortunately, magic and technology were fundamentally incompatible. Devices reliant on electricity or communication signals failed in the presence of magic. No witch or wizard had found a solution. Maverick believed this was simply because no master alchemist had tried. Technology's rapid growth was only a few decades old, after all. Fortunately, he already had a theory to make electronics usable for wizards. The answer lay in the ability to suppress magic, which allowed him to interact with technology. If he could create an alchemical invention using runes or embedded spells to separate magical energy from interfering with electronic signals, he could, in theory, make it work. This was the focus of his experiments. Maverick believed that once his alchemy talent reached an advanced level, he could invent something to prove his theory. After that, he could introduce a number of things and bring a real impact to the entire magical world. What the magical world sorely lacked right now was a secure, instant form of communication and a proper entertainment industry. There would certainly be competition once he introduced his innovations, but Maverick was determined to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to crack the principles behind his inventions. Before anyone could figure it out, he planned to monopolize both industries as much as he could. From gadgets to luxury items, and the changes to media that would follow, Maverick would ensure the brand he established would be on the tip of every witch's and wizard's tongue, ahead of all others. Maverick was determined to change the world of magic. He estimated that within 20 years, he could completely revolutionize the wizarding world. The next 2 years plus the 7 years of Hogwarts would be enough to lay the foundations for his ambitions. And this was just the wizarding world. The Muggle world would be easier for him to navigate in order to build his fame and fortune, as he had knowledge from his previous life. And finally, he needed to establish a force on his own. This would be separate from the business he has planned to establish. This would be for him to take care of things behind the scenes. His plans, although legal, would inevitably be met with resistance, and he can't always ask for his teacher to have his back. The force he would establish would be one only he could command. During his travels, he would keep an eye out for talent, carefully assessing each individual before offering them the chance to align with him. He was confident he could reach the rank of Great Magus within the next year, and with power, he could more effectively convince others to join his cause. But that didn't mean he would use force as persuasion. Power would simply serve as the ultimate security, while logic would be his tool for convincing others. He needed people he could trust, not those who might stab him in the back someday. Letting out a tired sigh, Maverick shifted into a more comfortable position on his bed. It was now nearing midnight, and he had unknowingly spent hours reviewing his plans, making thoughtful changes and small adjustments to his strategies and the roadmap for the coming years. All he felt was excitement, the next 2 years, then Hogwarts, and even beyond. The unknown, the unexpected, sent adrenaline rushing through his veins. This world was far larger and more complex than the familiar Harry Potter universe. Tomorrow, he would spend the day at home with his mother and father, cherishing one final moment of peace before setting off on his journey the day after. A small smile curled on his lips as satisfaction washed over him, and with that, he closed his eyes for the night.